rich program ahead of us, and we hope other people can also join us for the rest of it. But before I begin on the actual program for today, I just wanted to say a few words about the purpose of today's event. And the reason we are doing this event is because, there's a feeling among the younger generation, among the youth, that the freedom struggle is something of the past, that's something dead. And, that it has no relevance for the questions we face today, both as a society and as individuals. And so, in response to this, we are putting forward the idea that history is not something that is dead, but in many ways, history is something that we carry with us, because we owe our frame of references, our aspirations, all to history. And so today we are turning to a study of the Indian freedom struggle, which was a movement which under Mahatma Gandhi strove to create a new people who could be strong and proud and self-reliant. So the last thing I would like to say is that we are not doing this because we are sentimental about the past. We are not trying to go back, but we are doing this because we think that history, when it's taken up by the young, is a force that can change the future. So today we are here to honor two of our great revolutionary figures, Aruna Asaf Ali and Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay, and examine their ideas. When we were organizing this event, we were asked many times, why do you put the two together? And hopefully, today we can show that even though one was a doer and spent her life in action in the world of handicrafts, while the other was somebody who spent their life in the world of ideas and propaganda and publishing, essentially they had the same vision, which was created by the movement of the freedom struggle. And I want to read a little bit of what we've written as the mission statement for this event, which will kind of give you an introduction to the two figures. But before that, I just want to say thank you to Mrs. Vimla Rangachar, who couldn't be here with us today, Mr. Farooq and Mr. Devramani, who both work in the field of crafts, and Mrs. Shakuntala Narsimhan, who is a journalist, without whose help we could not have put this together. They offered us support that made it possible for us to hold this event. So to celebrate Aruna Asaf Ali and Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay is to celebrate the role of revolutionary women in India's struggle for freedom. Both women were remarkably independent in their thinking from a young age. They had very unconventional personal lives and faced opposition for this from both their families and society. But even though they created a new model for a revolutionary woman, they spoke very little about their personal lives in public. And whenever they were asked, they would not speak about their personal lives, but would talk about their work. And they saw their own lives in the context of the freedom movement and the substance of their lives in the work that they did for the people of India. Both went to prison in the freedom movement. Both had to face inhuman conditions of British prisons. Both faced solitary confinement and its mental and physical brutality. Both participated in the Salt March as young leaders and were shaped into revolutionary thinkers with their heroic participation in the Quit India movement. Kamaladevi ji was a student of Gandhi, and she recognized his role in providing the energy, the originality of the freedom movement. She said, Gandhiji's humanism and the identification that he had with the common people had drawn me to him. She was attracted to his interpretation of freedom, to his constructive program, and his recognition of the importance of women in the freedom movement. Aruna Asaf Ali would share this opinion. After independence, both of them were offered positions in the government, which they both refused. Kamaladevi ji would say, I left the highway of politics to step into the side lanes of constructive work. Aruna Asaf Ali and Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay would both theorize the place of women in the freedom movement and the case for women's liberation. While Kamaladevi ji was part of forming the All India Women's Conference, Aruna Asaf Ali would form the National Federation of Indian Women. They wrote on the subject many times. They both did not consider India to be civilizationally backward in terms of the place it gave to women. They defended the place of women in Indian civilization in their books Resurgence of Indian Women and Awakening of Indian Women. Further, both did not conceptualize the question of women as a question of battle between the sexes. They wanted a scientific examination of the question of women from the standpoint of the masses of Indian women, in particular the poor and working women. Kamaladevi Ji said, the bourgeois leaders of the feminist movement would do well to remember that these weary, hunger-stricken women, what they cry for is not the right to work, but the rights to the gains of their labor. Aruna Asaf also criticized the bourgeoisification of the women's movement after independence. She said, we refuse to think of ourselves as a class apart from the entire people of our country and insisted on being regarded as citizens who were equally responsible for the well-being and freedom of our nation. Kamaladevi Ji played a historic role in the revival and propagation of Indian handicrafts. She saw the destruction that British colonialism had wrought on Indian handicrafts. Speaking on the stifling alienation that modern society produces, she said, craftsmanship, on the contrary, involves the entire person, relating the mind and the material to a certain function for a specific purpose. She saw crafts as an embodiment of folk tradition, of a nation and civilization. She was opposed to the philosophy of art for art's sake and combined aesthetics with utility. She recognized that culture belongs to the people and must enrich them. To her, culture was not a commodity for the consumption of the rich, but an instrument of beauty in the life of every human being. Aruna Asaf spent her time building up the publications of Link and Patriot. The writings in Link and Patriot had a huge influence and worked for the political education of the people. Both these revolutionaries were part of the great movement for unity among anti-colonial struggles in Africa and Asia. They both attended several conferences. Kamaladevi Ji attended the Inter-Asian Relations Conference organized in 1947. She analyzed the common features in the condition of Asian nations, which had been exploited and immiserated by Western imperialism and foreign economic interests. She said, the people of Asia and the world must be made to realize that the political and economic emancipation of retarded continents like Asia and Africa have a direct bearing upon the question of world peace. Kamaladevi Ji took a particular interest in Africa. She traveled to Ethiopia and met Haile Selassie. She allied with the Egyptian freedom fighters. Kamaladevi Ji felt deeply about the situation of Afro-Americans and associated herself with Paul Robeson. She also visited China during their war against Japanese and Western imperialism and met great revolutionaries like Sung Ching-ling and Zhao Enlai. Whether it was the Vietnamese struggle against the French or the Egyptian or the Turkish struggle for independence, Kamaladevi Ji associated herself with a lot of darker nations. As she said to a ticket collector in the segregated south of the United States who tried to make her leave her seat, she said, I am a colored woman, obviously, and I have no intention of moving from here. She also saw crafts and folk traditions as linking different cultures and civilizations of the world. She organized the Asian Crafts Workshop in Bengaluru to achieve this end. The cause of peace was also dear to Aruna Ji's heart. She was one of the leading members of the Indo-Soviet Cultural Society and the All India Peace Council. She was part of Afro-Asian Solidarity, supporting countries like Bangladesh, Zimbabwe, Vietnam, and many others in their struggle against imperialism. She was awarded for her work the Lenin Peace Prize. She visited the Soviet Union many times and wrote on the socialist experiment taking place there. In many ways, she became a representative of the Indian people who, despite their poverty, sacrificed to ally themselves with the downtrodden all over the world. She would criticize the westernized elite, which identified with the thinking of the elites in the US and other European nations, and instead tried to bring forth the essential unity of India with other former colonies. Through their life's work, They were on a quest for a new synthesis of ideas. They were engaged in the work of discovering what form Indian society and the Indian state must take in order to fulfill the aspirations of the Indian people. Aruna would talk about the need for a new vanguard, a new young leadership which would emerge to take up the work the freedom struggle had started. Today we pay tribute to these revolutionaries by trying to understand their ideas in order to take them forward. I want to welcome our speakers. Our first speaker is Professor Ashok Chatterjee. Professor Chatterjee served as director of the National Institute of Design for 25 years. He was also president of the Crafts Council of India for over 20 years and has worked in the area of rural development extensively. He's also an author. Our second speaker is Professor Devaki Jain, who is an economist, who has been a lecturer at Delhi University, a visiting fellow at Harvard and Oxford, among others. She was a member of the South Commission chaired by Dr. Julius Nyerere. She is a recipient of the Padma Bhushan. She is also a founding member of the Development Alternatives for Women for a New Era, DAWN, a third world network of women social scientists. We are also fortunate to have with us Mr. Dattatreya Aralikatte, who is an internationally renowned puppet artist. He is a student of Guru Ranganath Rao and heads the Putthali Kalaranga theatre, which will be performing later in the evening. He is a recipient of the Sangeet Natak Akademi Award, among many others. So I'll now turn over the mic to our presenters, and they could give their opening comments. Afterwards, we'll have a discussion moderated by myself. So if I could request Professor Chatterjee to begin.
Okay. I'm happy to be at a function which is in memory of two great women who represented what a lot of wonderful women of that era did. Not just women, men also, because in both the lives that we are celebrating today, there were important men who stood by them, and often stood by them in the face of great social opposition. You just spoke about the fact that you're having this event to try and indicate that what we value is not a dead past, but a living present. And one of the many things that Kamaladevi ji did, as you may know, of course, was she worked tirelessly for the crafts of this country, not merely out of sentiment. She entered the area of craft activity as a result of the brutal partition, and what that partition did to millions of men and women who were displaced. And it was at Jawaharlal Nehru's invitation when millions of refugees from what was then West Punjab, moved into Delhi and into the Purana Killa refugee camp. And the need for livelihoods, and I stress that because this is very important, the need for livelihoods was what took Kamaladevi into the craft sector. Not sentiment, not about the past, but about rehabilitating men and women, and particularly women who had come to suffer so much as a result of the partition of our country, a suffering which has not ended even though these many years later. It was that which led Kamaladevi to the creation of the Indian Cooperative Union, because what these women in the refugee camps had to make had to be sold. And her whole purpose was that through earning some measure of dignity and hope would return to these women. And her instruction or her hope was that they would create something that would remind them of the beauty that they had left behind. And that is how the first collections of crafts emerged through Kamaladevi's leadership and under the inspiration and guidance of Jawaharlal Nehru. Very much like Gandhiji, both Panditji and Kamaladevi saw crafts not about sentimentality and about the past, but as a revolution. And as you know, Gandhiji put the charkha at the center of the freedom movement. What I want to share with you, and we can discuss this later depending on how much time you have, is that this sector, which Kamaladevi and other pioneers helped establish, is today in deep crisis. The whole cause for which they stood is in crisis. And there are reasons for that crisis, which I will try to share with you. But keep in mind when you're thinking of Kamaladevi that crafts is one of a whole myriad of things that she is concerned about. She is concerned about women's emancipation. Above all, she is concerned about women's education. She is concerned with the protection of the child. She is concerned with the performing arts, of which we will see today. She is concerned with world affairs, as we have just heard, with the theatre movement, with museums. All these things are there for her. But at the end of the day, she is concerned with the well-being of human beings. And that understanding of well-being, of development as well-being, of development as the ability, as Professor Amartya Sen has said, of people like us being able to make choices and to be able to perhaps achieve at least some of the choices we make. That for Kamaladevi, like it was for Gandhiji, that was what development was about. It was not about infrastructure. It was not about statistics, however important those are. So, if we are to look at, in terms of Aruna Asaf Ali, hers was a fight for justice. This is what she used all her life, and her whole position as a journalist and as a publisher was it a battle for justice. Both Kamaladevi and Aruna Asaf Ali stand for this understanding of development as well-being and of justice. And today, they are not about the past. Because that whole concept of progress as human well-being has come back. Has come back into the center of the global discussion as of 2022. And I'm talking about something called Agenda 2030. Which is the United Nations Global Agenda for Progress, which is measured by something called the Sustainable Development Goals. And what Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay worked for through the Crafts Council directly addresses 11 of those Sustainable Development Goals. No other Indian industry can make that claim. So what she was working for was not about the past. It was about the protection of this planet and the protection of the future generation. And her vision has come back now in terms of the understanding of the Sustainable Development Goals, of which, for all of us who work in crafts, Sustainable Development Goal number 12, which is responsible production and responsible consumption. That is what Gandhiji wanted. That is what Kamaladevi wanted. That is what those who followed Kamaladevi wanted. Giants like Popul Jayakar and others. It is what Lakshmi Jain worked for. Devaki's late husband, who was the right hand for Kamaladevi when she was setting up the the cooperative union and all that followed it. What is important in this understanding of freedom is that the sector of crafts is seen as important in several ways. One, of course, is livelihood. That's one. But the others are in terms of environment. This is the industry which makes the least demands on energy, has the lowest carbon footprint. So it's environmental. It is about justice that Aruna Asaf Ali fought for, because most of our artisans, I would say 90%, represent communities who are still at the margins of Indian society. Tribals, minorities, women who do more than 50% of the work in the crafts and do not get recognized. It represents the regions of our country which today are fighting for justice. Whether you're talking about the Northeast, Jammu and Kashmir, or the so-called Naxal belt. If you try and imagine a map of India and you draw that Naxal belt from north to south, it goes through the most craft-rich areas of our country, of which Bastar is only one. Does that tell us something? Does that tell us what we are doing to our country by neglecting the craft sector? It's hard to know, because about, I would say now more than 10 years ago, the Crafts Council of India was horrified to learn from the highest levels of decision making in this country that Indian crafts had no future. The term that was used to us was that you are wasting your time. You should get these artisans to go into IT. This was said at a very high level of decision making in Delhi. Because your industry, we were told, is a sunset industry. Let the sun set. Put these objects in museums. They have nothing to do with India's rise as a global power. It was that warning that made us change everything that we were doing in the Crafts Council of India. Because we realized suddenly that 50, 60 years after freedom, the vision of Gandhiji, Kamaladevi, Panditji no longer applied. We were on our own. We would have to imagine an India without crafts. And an India without crafts to us was unimaginable. We asked ourselves a simple question: why has this happened? Why have we come to this stage where the craft industry of India is called a sunset industry? And we realized after much work that it's about one thing. There is no data on this sector. And today, if you want to survive in the market or in industry, if you cannot provide data as to why you should get investment, you are like Mickey Mouse. Go and play in the corner somewhere, but don't disturb us who are busy doing bigger things. Why is there no data? Then we realized that Kamaladevi, even right after independence, fought a battle. Unfortunately, she did not fight it hard enough, and she did not continue to fight it. There was no data. The Marxists and the leftists, who were then leading a lot of the planning efforts in this country, told her that crafts is bourgeoisie. It's exploitive. It's not progressive. She knew that was bullshit, but she went across and she didn't quite know how to address it. That problem of data has continued till now. To cut a long story short, for the last 12 years, the Crafts Council of India and its partners have been trying to raise the small sum of 90 lakh rupees. 90 lakh rupees is what we need in order, this comes not from out of our heads, but from the economists' heads, to develop a methodology through which the size and scale of India's artisan sector can be measured. Because unless it is measured, this problem will continue. We are in a very competitive world. What is the problem? According to the Government of India's official Ministry of Textiles, which is in charge of this sector, Ministry of Textiles, stone, metal, wood, these great crafts are under the Ministry of Textiles. Does that make any sense? And the Ministry of Textiles' main job is the mill sector. Anyway, be that as it may, this ministry says there are 11 to 13 million artisans in this country. Not a small number. But the actual figure that we have been able to estimate is 200 million. And the former chairman of Microsoft, who's done some work on this, says our figure is wrong. He says it's 250 million. So you have 11 million official, 200 to 250 million on the other side. Who's going to take investment seriously if you don't even know your statistics? We as civil society cannot do the statistical work. But what has been enthralling for me is in these 12 years, the only champions standing by our side are the statisticians in the Ministry of Statistics who tell us, give us a methodology and we'll do the work for you. But we can't develop the methodology because we don't understand this domain. You'll have to do that and bring it to us. For that we need 90 lakhs. And for that we've been going from pillar to post for 12 years. And the head of the 6th or 7th Finance Commission told us 90 lakhs is peanuts. Don't go to government. We'll get it for you. And then COVID came. So we've lost another 3 years. We're still at this. We're still struggling because that simply has to be done. Until we know the figures, all the other contributions with crafts makes will fall through the cracks. So this is a long struggle. And why it's very important that Devaki is here with me and that we have the memory of her husband, Lakshmi Jain, because Lakshmi was the first economist or a person with economics on his mind. I don't know whether he regarded himself as an economist, but he had that sense that unless we look at the economics of this sector, we're going to be in trouble. And it was only much later we realized that that was going to be our absolutely first task. But today, all this has come back to us in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. To be able to challenge the Government of India and say, give us one other industry which addresses directly 11 of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. India has to report twice a year to the UN on the progress that India is making towards its Sustainable Development Goals. You may be interested to know that when India makes its report, the craft sector is never even mentioned. It's not even mentioned. Although millions of Indian artisans are contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. Why isn't it mentioned? Because we simply don't have the data. So we're back again. So let me end with that. And just to say, if I may, at the end of this, we can come to some of these issues later. we are talking about women in peace. We are standing on the shoulders of Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay and Aruna Asaf. Whose shoulders did they stand on? Because it's not as if they were the first women to blaze the trail. I want to recall, as my closing remark, that way back between 1903 and 1899 and 1903, a young woman called Sri Rangama, dressed in a 9-yard sari, would cycle from Chamarajpet to Central College. Sri Rangama was to become the first graduate in Mysore, the first woman to become an inspector of schools. Sri Rangama's granddaughter, Sujaya, is sitting in the front row. And Sujaya is putting together the story of her late grandmother, who also happened to be my late great aunt. So we are all the inheritors. When I was a child, we'd be taken to Malleshwaram to say, that is Atte's house. But only now are we discovering what a great lady Atte was. And yesterday, when I was talking to my cousin, Sujaya, her son and she brought out a photograph, which I wish I could show you, of Sri Rangama driving a Ford Model T around Bangalore in the year, I don't know what, 1910? So these are the kind of women that we have had. Not just women, because as in Sri Rangama's case, there were powerful men who stood up against society to support women like Sri Rangama and Kamaladevi. So let's keep that in mind, and let's hope that these women and men and what they stood for is regarded as about tomorrow and the day after, not just about the past. Thank you.
I'm so thrilled that two young people who have come back after being educated in America, Ayushman and I know his wife's name, but I'm just going to remember it, Nandita, should have thought of calling us together to remember heroines of the past. It's amazing. We've all been here in Karnataka and Delhi for years, but to call us together to speak about two women champions of that era is a wonderful idea, and I want to compliment them for doing that. I have a sense, since they talked to me, that they're doing it partly to re-invoke in us something called national spirit, not nationalism, but national spirit. Some way of saying, come on, let's do something which brings us back to the India that was built by these people, the India that was brought in to happen by Kamaladevi, by Aruna Asaf, by so many others. They made an India which was supposed to reclaim India's renaissance, that is handicrafts, handloom, village industry, living in rural areas, taking us to bring back India before the British came and put their stamp on it. That was an amazing thing they did, and it went on for nearly 5 or 4 decades, up to the beginning of this century. There was a desire to bring back village India and its skills and its culture as a central aspect of India. I must tell you a quote. Now you may say, how do I speak about Kamaladevi? Ashok knows her better. But I met her after I married Devaki Jain, who, as Ashok said, was her right hand for some time. He was like both a PA and a driver and what you call class 4. He couldn't move without him. If she landed in Delhi, he had to go and receive her. And after I married him, I objected to that. I said, she's landing at 11 o'clock in the night and Kamaladevi has called me. So she had that kind of power over the people. And people actually submitted to her because they knew that she was brilliant and she had a kind of dedication to India. Since Ashok has told you so much, I don't want to repeat that, I'll give you a few stories of myself and Kamaladevi and others, which may make you laugh and which may also tell you what a spirited woman she was. I used to love going to Rashtrapati Bhavan and to the Republic Day parade. I don't know how many of you lived in Delhi, but the Republic Day parade was something that everybody wanted to be and sit right in the front, watch those horses go. You see it on television. But having lived in Delhi, and my children, Gopal and Vasu, were 10 and 8, and they were dying to be there in the front row. So when my husband got some official positions, I thought he may be getting some special invitation, but he didn't get it. So when I spoke to Kamaladevi, she said, I hate it. Imagine we threw the British out and this idiot Rajendra Prasad sits in a coach and comes just like the British resident, clock, 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 on that road. She was aghast. She was appalled that those people with whom she had worked for freedom in India, to throw away the British, should exactly imitate them. Imagine the President of India living in Rashtrapati Bhavan, the place where the governor lived when the British were here. She found it disgusting. That is Kamaladevi. There was nobody else like her, not Aruna, Asaf, not others that you hear about, Captain Lakshmi. She had an ideology which was claiming India. Now, how do I say that? Apart from this anger she had for Rajendra Prasad living in Rashtrapati Bhavan and coming in a coach just like the previous resident came on the highway and all the soldiers doing salam to him, she thought that was the most horrible way of understanding India. But she did other things which Ashok has told you about. She revived India's indigenous crafts, handloom, handicraft. And one of the most beautiful things, if you read her biography, which I couldn't bring to you, she said when she went to the village and she saw beautiful things lying in the yard, that is what she wanted to bring to India. That is, things made of mud, of bamboo, of wood, seeing them as crafts. So in a way, when she brought back crafts, it was the visual of Kamaladevi going to villages and seeing the villages, things made of local material. So you see how an idea can be born only if the person has a vision. We see so much, that idea was born in her, that now my life is to revive handicrafts. And of course, as Ashok told you, she did a brilliant job in the way she gathered everybody and so forth. But Kamaladevi was also in some way, if you remember, she has written a book which I really feel that many of you who are students, who have come here to hear this lecture, should read. It's a biography, but it's not written like I. It's written on what she experienced. And I feel that if anybody here is an educationalist, they should bring it into the reading list for Indians. I'm hoping that Ayushman and you will remember these literature. Some of these people are not heroines like Subhash Chandra Bose or anything. They're actually builders of modern India. And I'm sure that those of you who have taught in colleges or schools, you have not found Kamaladevi in the book list which says Builders of Modern India. You've seen others, but not in Kamaladevi. Why? Because she didn't go to the top. She went to handicrafts, handloom, village industry. And so we hear of Gandhi as Khadi. We hear of Gandhi as doing charka. But we don't hear of Kamaladevi, who also did something very similar, but in a much larger scale, and which is still alive today. It is alive today because in every city in India we have emporiums, and many of you, if you want to buy a gift, you go there. So that is the stamp she left on India, which of course nobody else has done. But I don't want to repeat all that my friend Ashok has already told you. She had an ethic which I think we don't have. I don't think the women's movement of which she was a leader took that ethic. She would only wear handloom saris and only wear jewelry which was made by tribals. Now you see so many of our ministers, so many others who go, social workers, they've started wearing anything. This is khadi. And you can get khadi of any kind you want, stylish, cheap, expensive. But the ethic of khadi is now considered, is laughed at. Arey, what is it? But how does it really help? It's much better to have them. But khadi, when you look at the original, was to give something to every Indian in a village had a way of earning some money. Now we have Narega. You know what Narega is? It's an employment program by the government where if anybody goes to a village headquarters and says, I want a job, he can get a job at manual labor for 100 rupees a day. So you can easily earn 100 rupees a day if you go to the taluk and say, I want to work. But doing hard work, that is, getting up earth, breaking stones and so on. In her case, she thought that almost every, like Gandhi had khadi. You know Gandhi's program for khadi was that every household should have a charka. And he did what in economics we call backward-forward linkages. That is, I produce a khadi thing. You don't buy it, then what happens to me? So what Gandhi did was, he said you have to buy the khadi, but then when you pick up the product, it will be picked up by the khadi village industries. So you're supplied the wool, the yarn, you do the yarn, and somebody picks it up. So you just are a worker. You're backed up by supplies, and you're backed up by the market, and you get your wage. Today, if we offer something, we don't do that. So nobody wants to do these things because they don't have the marketability. So Gandhi had a very interesting, what in economics we call, backward and forward linkages to production. That is why the khadi business survived for so long. Now we all laugh at it. We think it's something esoteric, which we sometimes go to buy on Gandhi Jayanti or something like that. But by that, he gave a job to every Indian in this country. Now we don't do that. We give hard manual labor, which is not the same. So Kamaladevi picked up all those ideas and was a real devoted, what shall I say, follower of the Gandhian idea of a livelihood for everybody in the country. I knew her very intimately in the sense that I'm from Karnataka, she's from Karnataka. She was very lonely in Delhi at the India International Center after she retired. And she would like to have doshe, upma, coffee. And so at 5:30, when the IIC closed, she would turn up in our house. So I would make dosa, coffee, and so on. So we became very good friends over the years. And then when she got very old, she came back to Bangalore, and we spent a lot of time together. But we don't want to talk about her personal life, but her public life was such that she was a dissident. You know the word dissident? Doesn't agree with anything. So she was a revolutionary, a rebel. She wouldn't agree with anything. I know Ashok and all worked closely with her, and I'm sure they remember the kind of very, very strong advice she would give, which was almost, could never disobey them. But what I find we don't have now in women leaders is a political idea. We have women leaders now, but she had a political idea, and the idea was of reviving India's crafts, of giving some aesthetically satisfactory work to every Indian, and also for claiming India as a cultural hotspot in the world in the whole world. I don't want to say more because Ashok has told you almost anything that you wanted about Kamaladevi, and I'm glad that we have called her. There's a book she's written. I strongly recommend that whoever has organized this distributes that book free to those who want to see how an Indian nationalistic leader can develop out of nothing. Born in a village in Mangaluru, married at the age of 12, loses her husband immediately, he dies, and then she decides not to marry other arranged marriage. Annie Besant brings her to college in Madras. She does a BA, and then Harindranath Chattopadhyay is introduced to her by Sarojini Naidu, and she marries him. She has a child by him, and then she divorces him. And then she lives a life of her own. That Kamaladevi we never hear about. That Kamaladevi who got married before she was 14, and whose husband died when she was 14, and then walked out, we don't hear about. We only hear about this great woman who built handicrafts. But it's that courage that we have in every girl in India that makes her walk out of the imprisonment of various types of traditions, and then they can become a world leader. So those who have daughters and those who were daughters, do remember that objecting to rules laid out for you is the only way to make your own life. So did I. I'm a Tamil Brahmin, and I married a Jain, And when I went to tell my father that I was going to marry him, he said to me in Tamil, I have burnt you, which means I have cremated you. He didn't want to see me again. And I didn't mind at all because I was so much in love with this man that I thought cremation is the least thing. But my husband is Lakshmi Jain, who they talk about as one of Kamaladevi's right-hand men, was so charming that within a year, my husband had fallen for him and made him his favorite son-in-law. But so you can have dissent and succeed also. So most of you who are older here, but if you're young, I would say, object, dissent, choose your own path, and somehow it will all fall into place. Kamaladevi is an example of breaking every law in society. You know, she had an affair with a Congress politician, and for years they were together. And whenever she moved from place to place, the civil servants of Karnataka, of which my father was one, would say, "Noddiya kano, our ban yen marta idale." That is what she's doing. She's living with this man in some traveler's bungalow. So people badnamed her for the free way she lived. But if you cannot live freely as a woman, what's the point? So she broke all the rules, including what people say about marriage, living with other men, traveling, and she made a difference to India. And I think she's a model for all of us to follow. Thank you so much for bringing us to it.
ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ತೆ. ಯಾ ದೇವಿ ಸರ್ವಭೂತೇಷು ಕಲಾರೂಪೇಣ ಸಂಸ್ಥಿತ ನಮಸ್ತಸ್ಸೈ 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 ನಮೋ ನಮಃ. ಹ್ಯಾಪಿ ನವರಾತ್ರಿ. Today the beginning of Navaratri and the last day of Pitrupaksha. So in this occasion we are remembering great souls of India. That's Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay and Aruna Sapali. And illi nanu I do not want to give any more. ನಾನು ಏನು ಹೇಳಬೇಕು ಅಂತೇಳಿದ್ರು ಅವರು ಆಗಲೇ ಹೇಳಿಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಒನ್ ಮೋರ್ ಥಿಂಗ್ ಐ ವಾಂಟೆಡ್ ಟು ಟೆಲ್. ಇನ್ 1977 ಕಮಲಾದೇವಿಯವರು ಇಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿಗೆ ಬಂದಾಗ ರವೀಂದ್ರ ಕಲಾಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಏನೋ ಒಂದು ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರಂತೆ. ಶಿ ವಾಸ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲೈನಿಂಗ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ದ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಟ್ರೆಡಿಷನಲ್ ಪಪೆಟ್ ಥಿಯೇಟರ್. ರಂಗನಾಥರಾವ್ ಅವರು ನನ್ನ ಗುರುಗಳು. ಅವರ ತಾತ ಗ್ರೇಟ್ ಗ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಫಾದರ್ ವಾಸ್ ಎ ಗ್ರೇಟ್ ಪಪೆಟಿಯರ್ ದ ಟೈಮ್. ಆ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಕಮಲಾದೇವಿಯವರು ಮೆನ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರಂತೆ ಅವರು. ಅವಾಗ ನನ್ನ ಗುರುಗಳು ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಇದ್ರಂತೆ. ಹಾಗೆ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಪೂರ್ತಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಆದಮೇಲೆ ನನ್ನ ಗುರುಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗಿ, ನಾನು ಗ್ರೇಟ್ ಗ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಸನ್ ಆಫ್ ನರಸಿಂಗರಾವ್ ಅಂತ ಹೋಗಿ ಹೇಳಿ ಅವ್ರ ಹತ್ರ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ she was very much astonished, and then she completely cancelled her program, and then she wanted to see this old puppets. ಅವರು ನನ್ನ ಗುರುಗಳು ಮಾಗಡಿಯಲ್ಲಿದ್ದವರು. ಸರಿ, ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಡೇ ಅವರು ಹೋಗೋಣ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿಬಿಟ್ರು. ಅವರು ಬೇರೆ ಒಂದು ಕಾರ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗಿ ನೋಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದು ಆಮೇಲೆ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಂತೆ, ವೈ ಕಾಂಟ್ ಯು ಕ್ವಿಟ್ ಯುವರ್ ಜಾಬ್. ಸರಿ, ನಮ್ಮ ಗುರುಗಳು ಕೆಲಸ ಬಿಟ್ಟರು. ಆಮೇಲೆ ರಿವೈವಲ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಕಲ್ ಪಪೆಟ್ ಥಿಯೇಟರಿಗೋಸ್ಕರ ಅವರ ಒಂದು ಲೈಫನ್ನು ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರು. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಂತೆ, ನೀವೇ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಯುವರ್ ರೆಸ್ಪಾನ್ಸಿಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಟು ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಸಮ್ ಮೋರ್ ರಂಗನಾಥ್ ರಾವ್ ಇನ್ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಂತೆ. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ರಂಗನಾಥ್ ರಾವ್ 4 ಜನ ಶಿಷ್ಯಂದ್ರನ್ನು ತಯಾರು ಮಾಡಿ ಒಬ್ಬರನ್ನು ಒಂದೊಂದು ಕಡೆಗೆ ಕಳಿಸಿದ್ರು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಐ ಥಿಂಕ್ ಮೆನಿ ಆಫ್ ಯು ನೋ ಅನುಪಮಾ ಹೊಸ್ಕೆರೆ ಒಂದು. ಆಮೇಲೆ ನನ್ನ ಕಡೆಯಿಂದ ಬಂದು ದತ್ತಾತ್ರೇಯ ಅರಳಿಕಟ್ಟೆ ನನ್ನ ಪೂರ್ತಿ ಹೆಸರು. ನರಹರಿ ಶಾಸ್ತ್ರಿ ಅಂತ ಇನ್ನೊಬ್ಬರು ವಿಜಯನಗರದಲ್ಲಿದ್ದರು, ಅವರು ಈಗೆಲ್ಲ 2 ವರ್ಷದ ಹಿಂದೆ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ರಮೇಶ್ ಅಂತ ಕಾಸರಗೋಡಲ್ಲಿ ಒಬ್ಬರಿದ್ದರು. 4 ಜನ. ಈ ಒಂದು ದೃಶ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಕೊಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಗೌರವ ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂದರೆ, ಅವರ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ನನ್ನ ಗುರುಗಳನ್ನು ಬೆಳೆಸಿದ್ರೋ, ಗುರುಗಳು ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಬೆಳೆಸಿದ್ರು. ಐ ಡು ನಾಟ್ ವಾಂಟ್ ಟೇಕ್ ಯುವರ್ ಪ್ರೆಷಸ್ ಟೈಮ್. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ವಾಟ್ ಐ ವಾಂಟೆಡ್ ಟು ಸ್ಪೀಕ್ ಯು, ಮೈ ಪಪೆಟ್ಸ್ ವಿಲ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕ್ ಇನ್ ಫ್ಯೂ ಮಿನಿಟ್ಸ್. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸೋ ಮಚ್. And another one important thing, I lost my guru 2 months ago, Ranganath Rao, And another great personality for Craft Council of Karnataka, Narayan Rao, we have to remember here. So, with your permission, ನಾವು ಅವರಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ಕಾಂಡೋಲೆನ್ಸ್ ಕೊಡೋಣ 1 minute ಫಾರ್ ರಂಗನಾಥ್ ರಾವ್ is a national awardee, and then my guru, and Narayan Rao is the president of Craft Council of Karnataka for some time. So 1 minute condolence for them. Thank you so much.
I'd like to thank all three of you for your comments. I think maybe we can start the discussion, and maybe we can begin by, I'll pose a few questions to all three of our speakers. So the first thing that I wanted to bring up was, both of you spoke about crafts as an alternative economic blueprint. And Professor Chatterjee also spoke about, the Marxist influence on Indian economic planning. And, in reading Kamaladevi, we have found that she was both influenced by the Soviet experiment, as well as, of course, heavily influenced by Gandhiji. And also in Aruna Asaf Ali's work, you find this concept of the synthesis of Gandhi and Lenin. And, to put this in context, when we achieved our freedom, there was so much poverty and so much illiteracy that wealth creation was a necessary thing. And so, Nehru had this thing of industrialization, following the Soviet model. So I guess there's that tension, and in some sense they were seeking a synthesis. So I was wondering if you could comment on that.
What you say, there's so much economics now about backward forward linkages to any production system. So one could just use that and say that Kamaladevi, even as she promoted handicrafts, according to my husband who was her right hand, constantly arranged for marketing. He would say that, suddenly she would say, I want an exhibition in this town. She'd be traveling from one town to another in train, and this poor fellow was her as a secretary come assistant. This town we should have. So she would arrange for exhibitions all over India, in railway stations, in villages, in towns. And people would say, why? That was a marketing strategy. In the initial years of India's independence, not many people knew about. Now you go to Emporia, you have even multinationals opening cottage industries. But in those days, most of us probably bought what we could get in the market. So the number of exhibitions she had across India was one of her strategies in economics, which I think was brilliant, and which I think nowadays sometimes people say Dilli Haat, Maila Haat, but she was organizing it all over the place. So I think that was one big thing she brought into popularity of handicrafts. The other is that I think, if any of you have been to a shop called Tribes, there's shops in Delhi called Tribes. They sell what tribal people do as different from other people. And she, in a way, what shall I say, lit the light of imagination in many young people. And there's one woman who many of you don't know. Her name is Gulshan Nanda. She's now 90 years old. She then picked up Kamaladevi's idea that tribes also have their own ways of crafts. And they have, all India now, including in Bengaluru, you have a tribes workshop where sells products made by tribal people from all over India. This again, the kind of brilliant idea that she had, and she encouraged young people to follow that. So that was the marketing idea. Now what has happened is, many of us see handicrafts basically as something you give as a gift or something to decorate your house. But Kamaladevi wanted it to replace what you call the consumer goods. That is what we use normally, not only for gifts, baskets, pots. So there are some beautiful quotations which I know, I'm sure Ashok will tell you that, of saying that how when she goes to a village and she sees in the yard beautiful objects and she thinks, why don't this come to middle class homes in Bombay, Delhi, That's a kind of imagination of bringing life from the village to the urban. So in a way, I think now it has got a bit more commercialized. In those days, it was a kind of ethic, isn't it? That you buy khadi because you're feeding a spinner in a village. You buy handicrafts because you're supporting a tribal community. So I think I won't do any more of that conversation.
I think the point you've raised about ideological baggage is important. And it's still with us, because now it's another ideology, the so-called market-driven ideology. What is important to understand is that the pioneers of India's craft movement did not have these baggages. The first one was Gurudev. And Rabindranath Tagore, when he started the craft activity in Shantiniketan, the first thing he did was to start a shop in Calcutta. And this was objected to because many of those who were concerned with the quote-unquote fine arts thought we shouldn't become quote-unquote commercial, a term that dear Devaki has used just now. For Gurudev, for Gandhiji, for Kamaladevi, and for the other great woman in Indian craft, Pupul Jayakar, there was no distinction between what is commercial and what is not commercial. What they were concerned with was livelihood, that an artisan could earn and fill his stomach and encourage the next generation to go into the craft. Right? So that to me is an important lesson. The biggest challenge in the Indian craft sector today is marketing, which is why we need data, because we need investment. I've just been corrected by my honorable colleague there to say that apparently the official figure in the Ministry of Textiles is not 11 to 13, but 70. And if it's 70, that's very good news. But I'll be happy to share my statistics with you, and if they're to be corrected, that's fine. But 70 is still not the craft sector. It is much bigger than that. Right? Now, this is important because we're talking about marketing. And it is the Office of the Development Commissioner Handicrafts and the Office of the Development Commissioner Handlooms that introduced marketing schemes that the rest of us could use in order to serve the livelihood purpose that we were serving. But now that market has changed almost 360 degrees. Right? And we now need, of course we need government support, but we cannot count and depend on government. Government is supplement what the private sector and what the non-government sector has to do. And that's what we are now trying to do. Marketing is absolutely critical. I just say one correction. Devaki Jain has said that I have worked with Kamaladevi. I have worked with the Crafts Council of India, which she set up. But I never worked with Kamaladevi. And there's a little thing about her, what makes people human. I was associated with the National Institute of Design. And the National Institute of Design was a brainchild of Pupul Jayakar. And Pupul Jayakar and Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay were often seen as rivals. Right? As people who had different views. And Pupul Jayakar, because she came from a Thet Gujarati background, was often ridiculed as being that commercialization wali. But that's not true. And one of the most wonderful things recently that has happened to me is to discover that the first great exhibition of Indian craft that went out of India in 1955 to the Museum of Modern Art in New York was jointly curated by Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay and Pupul Jayakar. So Pupul Jayakar, Kamaladevi was rather dismissive of me, Because Pupul Jaikar would say, you're heading the National Institute of Design, you have to be in touch with Kamaladevi. But whenever I would ask for an appointment with Kamaladevi, I was always put off. So finally I got fed up. And I said to Pupulji, I'm fed up with this lady. I go and sit in the IIC and I'm kept waiting and I don't like it. So thank you very much. You can keep in touch with her if you like, but I won't. And she said, behave yourself. This is the lady who opened the doors for all of us, including you, meaning me. So she said, whether she sees you or not, you owe her everything. That was the spirit of these women. And sadly, even they were human. They had their falling outs, I suppose. But on the question of crafts, they were totally together. And some of the great names that your generation will know about, like Rajiv Sethi, Marthan Singh, some of these great people who have led the craft movement, both Pupulji and Kamaladevi were their mentors. And before she passed away, the National Institute of Design gave her the award which she treasured most, which was the Charles Eames. Charles Eames was the founder of NID. And we gave her the first Charles Eames Award for her contribution to lifting the quality of life in India. And Jasleen Dhamija, who is her biographer, has written that this award meant more to her than any award she had ever received. So it all comes back to respect for the artisan, respect for the past, and visioning the future.
Okay, on that note, let me ask you another question. So both of you have spoken about the change in ethics of the younger generations, Devaki ji in particular, and how the sort of values that you saw in a Kamaladevi ji or an Aruna Asaf Ali have changed in the generations after. And both of them saw this period. They both saw the decline of the consciousness that the freedom struggle had created. And they both wrote about it. And in particular, Aruna Asaf Ali even wrote about the need for an organization that would take up the mantle of studying the freedom struggle and taking it forward. A new leadership in some sense. So I was wondering if you could comment on both how that transition happened and what you see as the path for the future.
Has many assumptions which I don't think I would totally agree with. I don't think the interest in handmade goods has declined in a big way or the other. In a way, the commercialization of India has led to more interest in these objects. And so many new houses of what I call fashion houses have come up, which has the propaganda of, this is khadi, this is handmade, this is made in a village. If you buy this now, you'll be feeding 2 tribal women. That kind of stuff has come up as a kind of sales. And I think there is a lot of respect for goods that are made by hand. And look at all those organizations like Seva, Dastkar, and there are so many in Karnataka and Andhra, which are only looking at those people who are living in villages, who are doing embroidery, who are doing... And then in the midst of all this, the fashion houses of saris have gone back to the weaver. So many of these new saris that you see, they say they're in touch with weavers, and they what shall I say, interact with weavers in Bengal, in Banaras, in Tamil Nadu to get saris made. So, yeah, but since you are asking that question, can you let me finish? Yes. All right. I don't really need to talk, but I just wanted to challenge your question that is declining. So if you want to ask more, go ahead.
No. I just want to clarify the question so that you can, address it. Well, in terms of the change in ethics, what I mean is not particularly in the, in the crafts industry, but what I mean is the I guess, what young people see as the purpose of their lives, and the spirit of sacrifice and the spirit of, I guess, living for something bigger than yourself. And well, I can speak for my generation that I see it in my peers. And when I compare our lives to the lives that we are talking about, there is a difference. And so I guess, how do you account for that? And
Can I answer that first, please? I don't agree with you, you know. You told me this also when you came to see me. We are people like you in urban India who are also very highly educated and sincere are making assumptions about what the young people in India are thinking and doing. I think they're getting politicized. I think they're deeply engaged with India. And the number of groups now, and I see in Delhi, who go and live in villages to make transformation is enormous. So my appeal to you is there's much more to learn before you make those assumptions.
I would agree. I don't think there's any change in the commitment of young people. I've been working in the education sector for much of my life, and I would say that the young generation of today is far more engaged than my generation was. We took the freedom movement for granted. They don't. And largely because of the kind of politics of division and hate that we now have in this country, it's the young people who are challenging that. What they are asking for is not old formulas. They want to know, how is this relevant to our lives? Right? So don't give me lectures about the freedom movement. Tell me about how am I going to survive in this environment? Where will my income come from? What can I do for my children and my family? And we have to be able to address that. And that is the importance of this so-called craft sector. Because of Sustainable Development Goals, out of those 17, it addresses 11 of them. And those 11 are the future of our younger generation. And I can certainly tell you that at the National Institute of Design, which has been there now, first graduates came out in 1975-76, there's no shortage of young people willing to take the hard road. The problem is that if a young designer wants to work in the craft sector, who is going to pay them? Because in the so-called organized sector, you have your clients who employ you and give you a salary or a consultancy fee. In the social sector, that support system has not yet come up. So it's not the fault of the young people. It's the fault of the system. There's no shortage. I spend my life dealing with young people who want to have information and contacts for their careers. And this is the problem. If you want to work for the craft sector, if you want to work for education in villages, if you want to work for the health sector, there is nobody who will say, don't worry about your bread and butter, we'll take care of that. Nobody. And that's where the change has to come. And it will not come from government. We all depend on government for everything, but that era is gone. Now it has to come from corporates. For our effort to do this methodological survey for data for the craft sector, we have given up on government. And senior people in government have said, don't go there. They won't help you. It's the private sector that must understand the importance of what you're doing. And now we're getting contacts with them. We are doing the government's work, but the government does not give any priority to what we're doing. And how long are we going to wait? Because if we want to get jobs, and if we want to get salaries, and if we want to get investment into the craft sector, and I'm talking on behalf not just so-called elites, the greatest designers of this country are artisans. The artisan designers are in the lead of the design profession today. So there's no distinction to be made between young and old. It's the values and the ethics. And take it from me, the young people today in 2022 are far more committed than my generation was. Far more. We were riding the wave. And it was only when the wave came down with the thup, when somebody told us that your crafts are all sunset industry, that we realized we had taken for granted what we had no business to take for granted. We should have been fighting for the artisan from day one. But we thought having exhibitions, having sales, that was our work. Yes, it was our work. But more important than that was to create a supportive environment for the artisan and a change in the market to put a value on crafts. And as Devaki was saying, the leaders in the craft movement have not only been talking about high quality crafts, expensive crafts. A jharu is a classic craft product. It has to be brought back into every home. Baskets, boxes, utensils, right? All of them are beautiful, but they serve a function. And as a great sculptor once told me, go back to your students and tell them whatever they make, whether it is a spoon or whether it is a sari, make something beautiful for God. That is what craft is about.
Okay, I'd like to open up the discussion to the audience. If anybody would like to ask a question or even a comment, please raise your hand.
My second submission is I have come late and I haven't heard the first speaker thoroughly. However, when I came to this program, I had a definite expectation, and that could be different from the expectation of others here and the speaker. For that, if I say something unusual, kindly excuse me. The names of Kamala and Aruna conjure up in my mind two extraordinary fighters and their struggles. I thought I will hear about that also. Anyway, I would like to make a point or two. Today, if Kamala were to be born and had gone for a widow remarriage, what would have happened in South Canara? You think the youngsters there would have supported her? I have a slight difference with the speaker. The youngsters who constitute the most militant rightist communal organizations are not in small numbers. They are in very huge numbers. So Kamala has a message for our generation or even younger generation to fight back against the obscurantist forces. If Aruna had married an Asaf Ali today, you would have heard the whole India reverberating with the slogans of love jihad. How would these women would have reacted? If the Tiranga was made in China and brought here in thousands of tons, how these women would have reacted? And last but not the least, a certain gentleman in India has now today become the second wealthiest man for a few minutes, and then he became the third wealthiest man. Now, where do we place the handicraft and small industries here when MSMEs are wiped out? Many of the bigger ones are wiped out. So, in this social atmosphere, what would be the message of Kamala and Aruna, as I understand, is fight back, fight back, fight back obscurantism, fight back the march of huge capital. If I have understood it rightly, please say so. Or if any of you differ, I am ready to listen. Thank you very much.
I'm grateful you raised that question. You have no idea how pertinent it is. I mean, as a Karnatakan, to see what's happening in what was considered the advanced region, it's highest education, more universities and colleges, schools, literacy rate, everything is top. In fact, I did a study of Dakshina Kannada to contrast it with the UP village to show how advanced it was. To see that happening is absolutely very intriguing. What is your explanation of why? I think that there must be some reward in reviving the flames of fundamentalism that's happening there. Is the reward political reward? What is it? I'm very curious. I live in Delhi and I see this and I say, Hare, this is our Dakshina Kannada, highest literacy in India next to one's Kerala. And the whole place is twisted into animosity based on the most absurd and old-fashioned ideas. So can you address yourself to that? I think you have thought about it. I think I'd like to hear you.
I don't know whether I got your question right, but how the young people should react means they will have to react like Kamala and Aruna and be ready to go to jails. Just like this Rashid Kapan or Umar Khalid and a host of young people. I salute them. If you say young people have awoken and they have been fighting, I would say yes, but that is a small minority. Small minority. But I also believe that this tide is going to turn. After a time, I think again the new voices will rise. There is the hope, and we all will have to do our endeavor and draw the spirit from these women. Even now I cannot imagine. Aruna was so restless. She didn't stay in any organization for long. Wherever she was, she found some fault. She had the courage to say that I am not part of the herd here. I am going to walk out. She did it with every party, every organization. So how many of us have that guts to say that I am different and I have a different opinion and I like to voice it? I think that is a very, very relevant thing. We are making our youngsters technocrats. We are making them obey. And the models are also like that. See, the biggest model Bangalore has got. What he has said just a day back. He's praising the ruling establishment so that he can cozy up to them. Even when they are insulted, they do not fight back. So these are the wrong models held before our youngsters. If you ask any Bangalorean today, young girl or boy who is in software, who is your idol? Who is your icon? They will say that gentleman. You see, he has come up from scratches, he has built an empire and all that. Nobody would say that Kamala is my idol. Nobody would say Aruna is my icon. So I think that's the way forward. We will have to, it's not like boring these youngsters with stories of freedom struggle. I agree. That narrative, they may not be ready to listen. But these stories of sacrifice and struggle and resistance, I think Nandita was trying to raise that very question, that value, that spirit. I think that is very relevant.
Putthali had political parties that were linked to their movement. They were linked to the movement of they were linked to a political movement. There's no dearth of young people for this, but the politicians have let us all down. And that, to me, is the great tragedy. There's no shortage of numbers of young people. It is the fact that not young or old, or even like me, I'm almost 90, but the issue is, who is representing me in political life? And is there another alternative? It's too late for my generation, but the younger generation, I think, will find that alternative. I think you're right. The tide will turn because there are not small numbers. I'll give you an example of this. You may have heard of a young woman called Tista, who has been in jail in my state, in my city, for 2 months on false charges. We could not hold a meeting for her in the city of Ahmedabad because nobody will give you a hall. So it was held on the rooftop of somebody's house. And 3/4 of the people who came there were students. These are students in Gujarat. These are Gujarati students who are supposed to be part of this madness that you see. So the support is there. We need the catalysts who can mobilize them. You're right. Hopefully, the craft movement can also be a catalyst for that kind of change.
Anybody else would like to say something? Any comments are also welcome.
Just curious, is there any platform for these artisans who can demonstrate their skills, their arts to the whole world? So we have this, technology with us. We have the internet. We have everything. So is there a platform where these guys can go and bid their stuff and it is open wide to all everybody in the world? So is there something being done on this? I'm not sure because I belong to aerospace, so I have no clue what's happening here.
Office of Development Commissioner Handicrafts. First of all, I would like to say that all the artisans are, it was a 2016, a handicraft identity card has been introduced. It's called Pehchan, giving identity to the artisans. It is linked to your Aadhaar and also to your bank account, so that whatever you are getting from the government will go directly into bank account without any mediators. So this is a minimum identity to get for an artisan. Only thing you have to prove here is you should have a Aadhaar card and a bank account, and with 2 passport size photographs you can walk into any of the Office of Development Commissioner Handicrafts offices, or it's available on our website handicrafts.nic.in. So you can download it and just submit it in any of the offices. You will become a handicraft artisan, recognized handicraft artisan. So we have currently, as I said, 70 lakh artisans, registered artisans with us. We have complete data of all these 70 lakh artisans. It's available in the website handicrafts.nic.in. So you can look into that and it's available. It's available on the GEM government e-marketplace. So it's and also all over India, Office of Development Commissioner Handicrafts is conducting exhibitions. So presently there is one such exhibition going on in JP Nagar, Sindur Kalyan Mandapa. It's called Gandhi Shilpa Bazaar, sponsored by Development Commission Handicrafts and implemented by Karnataka State Handicrafts Development Corporation. So all over India, such exhibitions will happen, and throughout the year, it's a aim like almost 365 days we will have one or the other exhibitions in one or the other city. So once you register as an artisan with us, so we will depute you for that exhibition. So you will be paid TADA at the rate of 300 rupees per day, and also going and coming charges, and also transportation charges for all these programs. So you can participate on your. Thank you.
I was just wondering if Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay had any communication with Kalakshetra and Rukmini Devi and the whole handicrafts that were developing over there, and if you could say a few words about that.
So exciting to see it in Delhi. Rukmini Devi, Kamaladevi, all great friends, Bala Saraswati, they would all meet as if they were sisters. And there was a real camaraderie, and when they came up for funding, they would come up together. One of the people who transacted funding for Rukmini Devi was my husband, because he had influence. And similarly, they would say others who would come up for the same thing. It was a wonderful trio. There are books written about these 3 people, Kamaladevi, Rukmini Devi, and I think Bala Saraswati also joined them. So there was a lot of camaraderie. I think people like you and others should write more about the positive side of that era, not only the negative side of what is happening now. There was something about social mobilization, about tolerance, about rebuilding India. It was an ethic. It's a kind of thing that happens post-freedom. Everybody comes together to say, Hamara Desh hai. So that was very interesting. It was very interesting to see Rukmini Devi come to see Kamaladevi to see if she could raise funds for Kalakshetra. So there was a lot of camaraderie. On the more elaborate question, I think he wants to answer. I want to say that we are not helpless. There is a way in which when you say, why don't you, I think in India, in Bengaluru, for example, I know that a group of women, it's about 20 women, have set up a new thing called Women's Political Watch. And they're very active. They're bringing out letters, they give very good communication. And I think sometimes and I say this because I'm part of the women's movement, that the larger community of people, like you people, and even Anshuman, and don't recognize how much of the answers that you're asking for is coming from groups of women's movement. On rape, on anything you take, there's a huge network of women who are watching that. Now what is happening in Iran, they're responding to that. Perhaps I'm biased, but I think the most lively civil society group in India today is the women's movement, in different categories, for transgender, for LGBTQ, for anything that's happening in Iran, for example. Now you see fire coming out of a group of women. Men have been left behind, but I think that it would be very useful if people like Achman and others who are linked to you students and young professionals wake up, make a wake-up call to the men that there is a fire burning in India which is led by young women.
To the point of the platform, in addition to what our colleague from the Development Commissioner's Office has said, the most important platform that is needed is in marketing and for livelihoods. And this has become one of the most important platforms, particularly because of COVID. The importance of this has kept the artisans going through COVID, nothing else. The ability to communicate with each other and to sell products with this. There are a number of platforms. Devaki has mentioned Dastakar, Crafts Council of India is one of them, Dastakari Hath Samiti in Delhi. Throughout the country there are craft organizations, and these are platforms. More important is to say, are the artisans organizing themselves into platforms? Because one is to come from outside, but we are encouraging them to do what Kamaladevi asked them to do ages ago, to come into the cooperative movement. Because when they come together, that's the really important thing. And that is happening to some extent. It's the market which will bring them together. So we are saying to survive in this competitive market, you need these skills and you need organization skills. Right? And this is where there is no dearth of young artisans who are willing to take risks and who have demonstrated through almost 3 years of COVID their innovative capacities to deal with disasters. I think that's one of the biggest stories that should be told, is how these artisans have come through without much support from the government systems, either at the center or at the state. They've done it themselves. And that's what's really important.
We'll end here. Okay. We'll end the panel here, and we're going to take a 5-minute break, after which we'll have the puppet performance. And Mr. Dattatreya will also like to say something before the puppet performance. Afterwards, okay, afterwards. Okay, before we end, I'd like to thank both Professor Chatterjee and Professor Jain and for engaging with us and disagreeing with us. And I hope that our conversation has started some thoughts for everyone present, and I hope we can continue this in the future. So thank you all for attending.
ಪರಂಪರೆ ಇರತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಬೊಂಬೆ ಆಟ ಆಗಿದೆ ಇದು. ನಾವು ಇದರ ಒಂದು ಚರಿತ್ರೆಯನ್ನು ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಿಂಧೂ ನದಿ ನಾಗರಿಕತೆಗಿನ್ನ ಇನ್ನೂ ಹಿಂದೆ ನಮಗೆ ಈ ಬೊಂಬೆ ಆಟ ಸಿಕ್ಕತ್ತೆ. ಅದನ್ನು ಬಿಟ್ಟರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಪ್ರಾಚೀನವಾದ ಸಾಹಿತ್ಯ ಅಂದರೆ ವೇದಗಳು, ಋಗ್ವೇದ, ಯಜುರ್ವೇದ, ಸಾಮ ಮತ್ತು ಅಥರ್ವಣ ವೇದ ಅಂತ 4 ವೇದಗಳು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಯಜುರ್ವೇದದಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಬೊಂಬೆ ಆಟದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಕುರುಹುಗಳು ನಮಗೆ ಸಿಕ್ಕತ್ತೆ. ಪ್ರಧಾನವಾಗಿ ನಮಗೆ ಭಾರತ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಆಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಬೊಂಬೆ ಆಟಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಸೂತ್ರ ಬೊಂಬೆ, ಸಲಾಕೆ ಬೊಂಬೆ, ಸೂತ್ರ ಸಲಾಕೆ ಗೊಂಬೆ, ನೆರಳು ಗೊಂಬೆ ಅಥವಾ ತೊಗಲು ಬೊಂಬೆ ಅಥವಾ ಚರ್ಮದ ಬೊಂಬೆ ಅಂತ ಕರೀತಾರೆ. ಅದರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಕೊನೆಯದಾಗಿ ಗ್ಲೌ ಪಪ್ಪೆಟ್ ಅಥವಾ ಹಸ್ತಗೊಂಬೆ, ಕೈಗೊಂಬೆ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಈ 5 ವಿಧಾನಗಳನ್ನು ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವಾಗಲೂ ಪ್ರಯೋಗಕ್ಕೆ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇವತ್ತು ನೀವು ನೋಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ನಮ್ಮ ಇದು ಮುದ್ರಿಕಾ ಸಂಪ್ರದಾಯದ ಸೂತ್ರ ಸಲಾಕೆಗಳಿಂದ ಆಡಿಸ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಬೊಂಬೆ ಅಂತ. ಈ ಬೊಂಬೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ವಿಶೇಷ ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂದರೆ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಬೊಂಬೆಯು ಮರದಿಂದ ಮಾಡಲ್ಪಟ್ಟದ್ದು. ಅದು ಸಾಂಪ್ರದಾಯಿಕವಾದ ಮರದಿಂದ, ದೇವದಾರು ವೃಕ್ಷಗಳಿಂದ ಅದನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹದ್ದು. ಒಂದೊಂದು ಬೊಂಬೆನೂ ಸುಮಾರು 8 kg 10 kg ತೂಕ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಆದರೆ ಮಾನವಾಕೃತಿಯ ಬೊಂಬೆಗಳಿಗೆ ಕಾಲು ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಆಡಿಸಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಬೇಕಾದಂಥ ಹಾವಭಾವಗಳು ಬರಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಬೊಂಬೆಗೆ ಕಾಲಿದ್ದರೆ ಆಡಿಸೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗೋಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಯಿಂದ ಕಾಲು ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಇಂದಿನ ಇದು ಕಾಳಿದಾಸನ ಕುಮಾರ ಸಂಭವ ಅಥವಾ ತಾರಕಾಸುರ ಇಂದಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ. ಈ ಒಂದು ಬೊಂಬೆಗಳನ್ನು ಆಡಿಸಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿದ ಹಾಗೆ ದ ಬೇಸಿಕ್ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಡ್ಯಾನ್ಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಮ್ಯೂಸಿಕ್ ಎಸೆನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಟು ಮ್ಯಾನಿಪುಲೇಟ್ ದಿಸ್ ಟೈಪ್ ಆಫ್ ಹೆವಿ ಪಪೆಟ್ಸ್. ಇದರ ಹಿನ್ನೆಲೆ ಇರತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂದರೆ, ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಭಗವಂತನ ಕೈಗೊಂಬೆಗಳು, ಅವನು ಆಡಿಸಿದಂತೆ ಆಡಿಸುವಂತಹವು ಅಂತ. ಇದು ಮುದ್ರಿಕಾ ಸಂಪ್ರದಾಯ ಅಂತ ಇದೆ. ಮುದ್ರಿಕಾ ಅಂದರೆ ಇದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕೊನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಹೇಳ್ತೇನೆ. ಆದರೆ ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ವಿಚಾರ ಈ ತೋರ್ಬೆರಳು ಹಾಗೂ ಹೆಬ್ಬೆರಳು ಎರಡನ್ನು ಒಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಜೋಡಿಸಿದಾಗ ಉಂಟಾಗ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಸಂಯೋಗಕ್ಕೆ ಮುದ್ರಾ ಅಂತ ಹೆಸರು. ನಾಟ್ಯಶಾಸ್ತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಮುದ್ರೆಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಪ್ರಾಶಸ್ತ್ಯ ಇದೆ. ಈ ನಮ್ಮ ಬೊಂಬೆಯ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕೈಗಳು, ಹಸ್ತಗಳು ಸಹ ಈ ಮುದ್ರೆಯಿಂದ ಅದು ಇದಾಗಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಮುದ್ರಿಕಾ ಸಂಪ್ರದಾಯ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಇಂದಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ತಾರಕಾಸುರ ಅಥವಾ ಕುಮಾರ ಸಂಭವ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಅಂದ್ಕೋಬಹುದು. ಕಾಳಿದಾಸನ ಕುಮಾರ ಸಂಭವದಲ್ಲಿ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಕೆಲವು ನಾಟಿಕೆಯ ಅಂಶಗಳನ್ನು ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಂಡು ಬೊಂಬೆಯ ಆಟಕ್ಕೆ ಮೊಟ್ಟ ಮೊದಲಿಗೆ ಅಳವಡಿಸಿದವರು ನಾವು ಇಡೀ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ. ಎಷ್ಟು ವಿಚಾರವನ್ನು ಹೇಳಿ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಮಗದೊಮ್ಮೆ ನಿಮಗೆ ಈ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ, ಕೊನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಹೇಗೆ ಬೊಂಬೆಯನ್ನು ಆಡಿಸಿದ್ದೀವಿ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ನಿಮಗೆ ಆಡಿಸಿ ಹಾಡಿ ನಾವು ತೋರಿಸ್ತೀವಿ. ಅಲ್ಲಿವರೆಗೂ ಪುನಃ ನಿಮಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಪುನಃ ಸ್ವಾಗತ, ಸುಸ್ವಾಗತ.
शुक्लांबरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये. अगजानन पद्मार्कं गजाननमहर्निशम् अनेकदन्तं भक्तानां एकदन्तमुपास्महे. आदय्यतों दिन्नों दित्तत्तदिगिणतै दित्तत्तदिगिणतों दित्तत्तदिगिणथ. स्वामी गणपन विघ्नराजन निनगे वंदन वंदन. स्वामी गणपन विघ्नराजन निनगे वंदन वंदन. करुणೆಯಿಂದಲೇ ರಕ್ಷಿಸು ಮನ ಗಿರಿನಂದನ ನಂದನ. ಸ್ವಾಮಿ ಗಣಪನ ವಿಘ್ನರಾಜನ ನಿನಗೆ ವಂದನ ವಂದನ. ರಕ್ತವರ್ಣನ ಬೀಜವರ್ತನೆ ಉರಗಭರಣಧಾರಿಯೇ. ರಕ್ತವರ್ಣನ ಬೀಜವರ್ತನೆ
ಬಂದ ಬಂದ ತಾರಕ ಮೂರು ಲೋಕ ಕಂಟಕ ಲೋಕವ ಗೆಲ್ಲಲು ಬೇಗ ಬಂದ ತಾರಕ ಬಂದ ಬಂದ ತಾರಕ ಮೂರು ಲೋಕ ಕಂಟಕ ಲೋಕವ ಗೆಲ್ಲಲು ಬೇಗ ಬಂದ ತಾರಕ ಲೋಕವ ಗೆಲ್ಲಲು ಬೇಗ ಬಂದ ತಾರಕ ಲೋಕವ ಗೆಲ್ಲಲು ಬೇಗ ಬಂದ ತಾರಕ.
ನನ್ನನ್ನು ಕಂಡರೆ ಹರಿಹರ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮಾದಿಗಳು ನಡುಗುವಂತೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಲ್ಲ. ಈಗೇನು ಮಾಡಲಿ? ಭೂಲೋಕದಲ್ಲಿ ನನ್ನನ್ನು ಸರಿಗಟ್ಟುವವರು ಯಾರೂ ಇನ್ನೂ ಹುಟ್ಟಿಲ್ಲ, ಮುಂದೆ ಹುಟ್ಟುವುದೂ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಇನ್ನು ಆ ದೇವಲೋಕದಲ್ಲಿ ನನ್ನ ವೈರಿಗಳ ಹಿಂಡೇ ಇದೆ. ಅವರನ್ನು ನನ್ನ ಮುಷ್ಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ಟುಕೊಳ್ಳುವುದು ಎಷ್ಟರ ಮಾತು. ನಾರಾಯಣ ನಾರಾಯಣ. ಯಾರದು? ನನ್ನ ವೈರಿಯ ಗುಣಗಾನವನ್ನು ಮಾಡುತ್ತಾ ನನ್ನ ಸಮೀಪವೇ ಬಂದಂತೆ ಇರುವುದಲ್ಲ. ಬಹುಶಃ ಆ ಕಪಟಿಗಳ ನಾಟಕವೇ ಇರಬೇಕು.
ನಾರಾಯಣ ನಾರಾಯಣ. ಓ, ಏನು ತಾರಕ, ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿದ್ದೀಯಾ?
ಓಹೋ ನಾರದ, ನೀನು ಆ ನನ್ನ ವೈರಿಯನ್ನು ಕೊಂಡಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದುದು.
ಆತನೇ ತಾನೇ ನನಗೆ ನಿನಗೆ ಈ ಸಮಸ್ತ.
ಮುಚ್ಚು ಬಾಯಿ ಜೋಗಿ. ನೀನು ಬರುವಾಗ ಏನೆಂದೆ? ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿದ್ದೀಯಾ ಎಂದೆಯಾ? ಏಯ್, ನಾನು ಯಾರು?
ತಾಕರ ಅಲ್ಲ ಅಲ್ಲ, ತಾರಕ.
ಏನಂದೆ?
ತಾರಕ ಚಕ್ರವರ್ತಿ ಅಂದೆ.
ಅದು ಅದು ಇನ್ನು ಮೇಲೆ ನೀನು ನನ್ನ ಗುಣಗಾನ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ನನ್ನನ್ನೇ ಹೊಗಳಬೇಕು, ನನ್ನನ್ನೇ ಪೂಜಿಸಬೇಕು. ತಿಳಿಯಿತೆ?
ಇಲ್ಲ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಉಂಟೆ. ನಾರಾಯಣ ನಾರಾಯಣ. ಅಲ್ಲ ತಾರಕ, ನಾರಾಯಣ ನೀನೇ ಕಾಪಾಡು.
ನಾರದ, ಇನ್ನೊಮ್ಮೆ ಆ ಕಪಟಿಯ ಹೆಸರನ್ನು ಹೇಳಿದರೆ ನಿನ್ನನ್ನು ಈ ಕಡೆಯಿಂದ ಅಪ್ಪಳಿಸಿ ಯಮಪುರಿಗೆ ಕಳಿಸಿಬಿಟ್ಟೇನು ಜೋಕೆ.
ಕ್ಷಮಿಸು ಕ್ಷಮಿಸು ತಾರಕ, ಅಭ್ಯಾಸ ಬಲ ಅಭ್ಯಾಸ ಬಲ.
ಇನ್ನೊಮ್ಮೆ ಆ ಹರಿಯ
ಖಂಡಿತ ಇಲ್ಲ. ತಾರಕ ಚಕ್ರವರ್ತಿ, ಭೂಲೋಕದೊಡೆಯ, ತಾರಕನೇ ಸಕಲ ಗುಣ ಸಂಪನ್ನ ಶೂರನೇ. ನಿನ್ನ ಕರುಣೆಗೆ ನಾರದನ ಅಭಿನಂದನೆ.
ಭಲೆ ಭಲೆ ನಾರದ, ನಿನ್ನನ್ನು ನೋಡಿದರೆ ಅಯ್ಯೋ ಎನ್ನಿಸುತ್ತದೆ. ನನ್ನ ಆರ್ಭಟಕ್ಕೆ ಅಂಜಿದೆಯಾ?
ಅಂಜುವುದುಂಟೆ ನಾರಾಯಣ. ಅಲ್ಲ 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 ಅಲ್ಲ, ತಾರಕನ ಅಭಯ ಇರೋ ತನಕ. ಆದರೆ ತಾರಕ
ಏನೆಂದೆ?
ಅಲ್ಲ ಅಲ್ಲ, ತಾರಕ ಚಕ್ರವರ್ತಿಗಳೇ, ನನ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ನೋವು ನಿಮ್ಮ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕಾಡುತ್ತಿದೆ.
ಏನು? ನಿನಗೆ ನನ್ನ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನೋವೆ? ಹೋಗಲಿ ನಾರದ, ನಿನ್ನ ನೋವು ಏನೆಂದು ತಿಳಿಸು. ಚಕ್ರವರ್ತಿಯಾದ ನಾನು ಅದನ್ನು ನಿವಾರಿಸುವುದು ನನ್ನ ಧರ್ಮ.
ಧರ್ಮ? ತಾರಕೇಶ್ವರ ಚಕ್ರವರ್ತಿ, ತಾರಕೇಶ್ವರ, ನನ್ನ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಈ ಕಾಳಜಿ ಹೊಂದಿದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅದೇ ನನ್ನ ಭಾಗ್ಯ. ನನಗೂ ಅದೇ ಬೇಕಾದ್ದು.
ಅದೇನು ಬೇಕಾದ್ದು ಎಂದೆಯಲ್ಲ? ಇದು ನಿನ್ನ ಅಭಿಲಾಷೆಯೋ ಅಥವಾ ಆ ಕಪಟಿಗಳ ನಾಟಕದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿನ್ನ ಪಾತ್ರ?
ಖಂಡಿತ ಇಲ್ಲ ತಾರಕೇಶ್ವರ, ಖಂಡಿತ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಆ ದೇವತೆಗಳು ನಿಜವಾಗಿ ಕೊಬ್ಬಿರುವ ರಹಸ್ಯ ನಿನಗೆ ತಿಳಿಯದೇ ಇರುವುದು
ರಹಸ್ಯವೇ? ಇರಬಹುದು ಇರಬಹುದು. ನೀನು ಇಷ್ಟು ದಿನ ಅವರ ಪಕ್ಷಪಾತಿ ಅಲ್ಲವೇ? ಅವರ ರಹಸ್ಯ ನಿನಗೆ ತಿಳಿದಿರಲಿಕ್ಕೂ ಸಾಕು.
ನೀವು ಹೇಳುತ್ತಿರುವುದು ಅಕ್ಷರಶಃ ನಿಜ. ಅದೇನೆಂದರೆ, ಸಮುದ್ರ ಮಥನ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಆ ಅಮೃತ ಕುಡಿದ ಅವರು ಸಾಯಲು ಸಾಧ್ಯವೇ?
ಅಂದರೆ ಏನು ಇದರ ಅರ್ಥ ನಾರದ? ಈ ವಿಷಯವನ್ನು ನನ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಒತ್ತಿ ಒತ್ತಿ ಹೇಳುತ್ತಿರುವ
ಕಾರಣವೇನಾದರೂ ಇರಲಿ, ನನ್ನ ಸ್ವಾಮಿಯು ಅವರಂತೆ ಅಮರನಾದರೆ ನನ್ನ ಇಷ್ಟಾರ್ಥ ಮುಗಿದಂತೆ.
ಅಹುದು ಅಹುದು, ನೀನು ಹೇಳುವುದು ಸತ್ಯ. ನಾನು ಅಮರನಾಗಬೇಕು. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಏನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕೆನ್ನುತ್ತೀಯೇ?
ತಡ ಮಾಡದೆ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮನನ್ನು ತಪಸ್ಸಿನಿಂದ ಒಲಿಸಿಕೊಂಡು ಅಮರನಾಗಬೇಕು ಎಂದು ವರಾಕಿಗಳು. ಆ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮ ವರ ಕೊಟ್ಟನೆಂದರೆ ಆ ದೇವತೆಗಳು ಯಾವ ಮಹಾ.
ಯಲಾ ಜೋಗಿ, ಭಲೆ ಭಲೆ, ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ಲ. ನಿನಗೂ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ. ಈ ರೀತಿ ಆಗಿಂದಾಗ್ಗೆ ಒಂದೊಂದು ಉತ್ತಮ ಸಲಹೆಗಳನ್ನು ಕೊಡುತ್ತಿರು. ಅಂದ ಹಾಗೆ ನಾರದ, ನಾನು ಈಗಲೇ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮದೇವನನ್ನು ಕುರಿತು ತಪಸ್ಸು ಮಾಡುತ್ತೇನೆ.
ತಾರಕೇಶ್ವರನೇ ನಮೋ ನಮಸ್ತು. ದೇವತೆಗಳ ವೈರಿಯೇ ನಮೋ ನಮಃ.
ಕಿಡಿಗಿಡಿ ತಾತ ದಿಗಿ ದಿಗಿ ತೋಂ ದಿತ್ತತ್ತ ದಿಗಿಣ ತೈ ದಿತ್ತತ್ತ ದಿಗಿಣ ತೋಂ ದಿತ್ತತ್ತ ದಿಗಿಣ ಥಾ. ಬಂದ ಬಂದ ತಾರಕ ಮೂರು ಲೋಕ ಕಂಟಕ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮನ ಬೇಡಲು ಬೇಗ ಬಂದ ತಾರಕ. ಬಂದ ಬಂದ ತಾರಕ ಮೂರು ಲೋಕ ಕಂಟಕ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮನ ಬೇಡಲು ಬೇಗ ಬಂದ ತಾರಕ. ನಮುಜಿಯ ಸುತನು ಪಾತಾಳ ದೈತ್ಯನು ರಾಜಿಯ ಸುತನು ಪಾತಾಳ ದೈತ್ಯನು ಸಾಯದೆ ಬದುಕಲು ಬೇಡಲು ಬಂದನು. ಬಂದ ಬಂದ ಆಹಾ ಬಂದ 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 ತಾರಕ ಮೂರು ಲೋಕ ಕಂಟಕ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮನ ಬೇಡಲು ಬೇಗ ಬಂದ ತಾರಕ. ಬ್ರಹ್ಮನ ಬೇಡಲು ಬೇಗ ಬಂದ ತಾರಕ. ಬ್ರಹ್ಮನ ಬೇಡಲು ಬೇಗ ಬಂದ ತಾರಕ. ತಜ್ಜಂ ತಜ್ಜಂ ತದಿಗಿನ ತೋಂ ತದಿಗಿನ ತೈ ತದಿಗಿನ ಥಾ.
ಈ ಪ್ರಶಾಂತ ಸ್ಥಳದಲ್ಲಿ ಕುಳಿತು ಬ್ರಹ್ಮದೇವನನ್ನು ಕುರಿತು ತಪಸ್ಸು ಮಾಡಿ ಅಮರತ್ವವನ್ನು ಪಡೆಯುತ್ತೇನೆ. ನಂತರ ಸ್ವರ್ಗ ಮರ್ತ್ಯ ಪಾತಾಳಗಳನ್ನು ನನ್ನ ಹಿಡಿತದಲ್ಲಿಟ್ಟುಕೊಂಡು ಮೆರೆಯುತ್ತೇನೆ. ಓಂ ನಮೋ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮದೇವಾಯ. 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 ಬ್ರಹ್ಮದೇವಾಯ. ಓಂ ನಮೋ
ಬ್ರಹ್ಮದೇವಾಯ.
ತಪಸ್ಸಿಗೆ ಕುಳಿತನು ತಾರಕ ವೇದ ಅಪರೂಪ ದೊರವನು ಪಡೆಯಲಿಕ್ಕೆ. ತಪಸ್ಸಿಗೆ ಕುಳಿತನು ತಾರಕ ಬೇಗ ಅಪರೂಪ ದೊರವನು ಪಡೆಯಲಿಕ್ಕೆ. ಸತ್ಯಲೋಕದ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮದೇವ ಬಂದ, ಸತ್ಯಲೋಕದ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮದೇವ ಬಂದ, ಪಥ್ಯದ ಮಾತನ್ನು ನುಡಿಯಲಿಕ್ಕೆ, ಪಥ್ಯದ ಮಾತನ್ನು ನುಡಿಯಲಿಕ್ಕೆ. ತಪಸ್ಸಿಗೆ ಕುಳಿತನು ತಾರಕ ಬೇಗ ಅಪರೂಪ ದೊರವನು ಪಡೆಯಲಿಕ್ಕೆ.
ನಮೋ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮದೇವಾಯ. ಓಂ ನಮೋ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮದೇವಾಯ. ಓಂ ನಮೋ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮದೇವಾಯ.
ತಾರಕಾಸುರ,
ಓಂ
ತಾರಕಾಸುರ, ನಿನಗೆ ಏನು ಹೊರಬೇಕು ಬೇಡಿಕೊ, ನಾನು ನಿನ್ನ ಇಚ್ಛೆಯನ್ನು ಪೂರ್ಣ ಮಾಡುವೆ.
ಪ್ರಭೋ ಪ್ರಭೋ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮದೇವ, ತಾವು ನನ್ನ ಮೇಲೆ ಪ್ರಸನ್ನ ಚಿತ್ತರಾಗಿರುವಿರಿ. ನಾನು ಅಜರನಾಗಬೇಕು, ಅಮರನಾಗಬೇಕು, ಅಜೇಯನಾಗಬೇಕು. ಇಂಥ ವರವನ್ನು ಕರುಣಿಸಿದೇವ.
ನೀನು ಅಮರನಾಗಲು ಸಾಧ್ಯವಿಲ್ಲ. ಜಾತಸ್ಯ ಮರಣಂ ಧ್ರುವಂ. ಯಾರು ಮರ್ತ್ಯ ಪಾತಾಳಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಜನ್ಮ ತಳೆಯುತ್ತಾರೋ ಅವರು ಮರಣ ಹೊಂದಲೇಬೇಕು.
ಹಾಗಾದರೆ ನನ್ನನ್ನು ಅಜೇಯನನ್ನಾಗಿ ಮಾಡಿ ನನಗೆ ಎಂದಿಗೂ ಯಾರಿಂದಲೂ ಸೋಲುಂಟಾಗದ ಹಾಗೆ ವರವನ್ನು ದಯಪಾಲಿಸಿ ದೇವ.
ದೈತ್ಯರಾಜ, ನೀನು ಅಜೇಯನಾಗುವೆ. ಆದರೆ ಒಬ್ಬ ಬಾಲಕನನ್ನು ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಉಳಿದವರೆಲ್ಲರನ್ನೂ ಗೆಲ್ಲುವೆ.
ಬಾಲಕ? ಯಾರು ಆ ಬಾಲಕ?
ಶಿವಪುತ್ರನಾದ ಕುಮಾರನೇ ಆ ಬಾಲಕ.
ಬ್ರಹ್ಮದೇವ, ಶಿವನ ಪತ್ನಿ ದಾಕ್ಷಾಯಿಣಿ ಯಜ್ಞದ ಅಗ್ನಿಕುಂಡಕ್ಕೆ ಬಿದ್ದು ಪ್ರಾಣತ್ಯಾಗ ಮಾಡಿದಳು. ಇದರಿಂದ ಬೇಸರಗೊಂಡ ಪರಶಿವನು ಹಿಮಾಲಯದಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲೋ ತಪಸ್ಸಿಗೆ ಕುಳಿತಿದ್ದಾನೆ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಮದುವೆಯಾಗಿ ಆ ದಂಪತಿಗಳಿಗೆ ಮಗುವಾದಾಗ ತಾನೇ ನನಗೆ ಭಯ. ಆಗಲಿ ದೇವ, ಅದೇ ವರವನ್ನು ಕರುಣಿಸು.
ತಥಾಸ್ತು.
ಆಹಾ! ನಾನು ಇಂದಿನಿಂದ ಅಜೇಯ, ನಾನು ಇಂದಿನಿಂದ ಅಜೇಯ, ನಾನು ಅಜೇಯ.
ತಾರಕ ಮುರುಲೋಕ ಕಂಟಕ ಇಂದ್ರನ ಗೆಲ್ಲಲು ಸಾಗಿದ ತಾರಕ. ಬೇಗ ಹೊರಟ ತಾರಕ ಮುರುಲೋಕ ಕಂಟಕ ಇಂದ್ರನ ಗೆಲ್ಲಲು ಸಾಗಿದ ತಾರಕ. ಇಂದ್ರನ ಗೆಲ್ಲಲು ಸಾಗಿದ ತಾರಕ. ಇಂದ್ರನ ಗೆಲ್ಲಲು ಸಾಗಿದ ತಾರಕ. ತಜ್ಜಂ ತಜ್ಜಂ ತದಿಗಿನ ತೋಂ ತದಿಗಿನ ತೈ ತದಿಗಿನ ಥಾ.
जय जनार्दना कृष्ण राधिकापते, जन विमोचना कृष्ण जन्म मोचना. जय जनार्दना कृष्ण राधिकापते,
ಇಂದ್ರಾಯ ಸ್ವಾಹಾ ಇಂದ್ರಾಯ ಇದಂ ನಮಃ. ಓಂ ಅಗ್ನಯೇ ಸ್ವಾಹಾ ಅಗ್ನಯೇ ಇದಂ ನಮಃ. ಓಂ ಯಮಾಯ ಸ್ವಾಹಾ ಯಮಾಯ ಇದಂ ನಮಃ. ಓಂ ನೈಋತ್ಯಾಯ ಸ್ವಾಹಾ ನೈಋತ್ಯಾಯ ಇದಂ ನಮಃ.
ಧೀಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಧೀಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಓಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಧೀಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಓಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಪ್ರತಿತೈ ಜನ ಪ್ರತಿತೈ ಜನ
ಓಹೋ, ಈ ದುಷ್ಟ ಋಷಿಗಳು ಇಂದ್ರಾದಿ ಅಷ್ಟದಿಕ್ಪಾಲಕರಿಗೆ ಹವಿಸ್ಸನ್ನು ಕೊಡುತ್ತಿರುವರು. ಅಜೇಯನಾದ ನನ್ನನ್ನು, ಈ ತಾರಕಾಸುರನನ್ನು ಮರೆತ ಇವರಿಗೆ ಸರಿಯಾದ ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಕಲಿಸುವೆ. ಋಷಿಗಳ ಯಜ್ಞವನ್ನು ನಾಶ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾಯಿತು. ಇನ್ನು ಆ ದೇವಸಿಂಹಾಸನಕ್ಕೆ ಲಗ್ಗೆ ಇಡುತ್ತೇನೆ.
ಓಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಹೀಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಓಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಹೀಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಓಂ ತತ್ತ ಇಂದ್ರ ದೇವ ದೇವರ ದೇವ ಸುರಗಣ ದೇವ ದೇವರ ದೇವ ಸುರಗಣ ದೇವ ಬಂದನು ಬಂದನು ಇಂದ್ರ ದೇವ ಇಂದ್ರ ದೇವ ಇಂದ್ರ ದೇವ ಬರುತಿಹನವನು ಐರಾವತವೆರಿ ಸಿರಿಯಲಿ ತಾನು ಸಚ್ಚಿನ ಮದವೆರಿ ಬರುತಿಹನವನು ಐರಾವತವೆರಿ ಸಿರಿಯಲಿ ತಾನು ಸೊಕ್ಕಿನ ಮದವೆರಿ ಗುರುರಾಜನು ತಾನೆಂಬ ಸೊಕ್ಕರಿ ಅರಿಯದೆ ಮುಂದಣ ಅವನತಿಯ ಅರಿಯದೆ ಮುಂದಣ ಅವನತಿಯ ಬಂದನು ಬಂದನು ಇಂದ್ರದೇವ 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 ತಜ್ಜಂ ತಜ್ಜಂ ತದಿಗಿಣ ದೋಂ ತದಿಗಿಣ ತೈ ತದಿಗಿಣ ತಾ ಸೊಕ್ಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮೆರೆಯುವೆನು ನಾನು ಸೊಕ್ಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮೆರೆಯುವೆನು ಸೊಕ್ಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮೆರೆಯುವೆನು ನಾನು ಸೊಕ್ಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮೆರೆಯುವೆನು ರಕ್ಕಸರ ಸೊಕ್ಕು ಮುರಿದು ಧಿಕ್ಕರಿಸುತ್ತಲಿ ನಿಂದು ರಕ್ಕಸರ ಸೊಕ್ಕು ಮುರಿದು ಧಿಕ್ಕರಿಸುತ್ತಲಿ ನಿಂದು ಸೊಕ್ಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮೆರೆಯುವೆನು ನಾನು ಸೊಕ್ಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮೆರೆಯುವೆನು ನಾನು ಸೊಕ್ಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮೆರೆಯುವೆನು.
ಅಮರಾವತಿಯ ಅಧಿಪತಿ ಎಂದು ಸೊಕ್ಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮೆರೆಯುತ್ತಿರುವ ದೇವರಾಜ, ಇದು ಕೇಳಿಲ್ಲಿ. ನಾನು ತಾರಕಾಸುರ, ಬ್ರಹ್ಮನಿಂದ ಅಜೇಯನಾಗಿಂದು ವರ ಪಡೆದು ನಿನ್ನ ಸೊಕ್ಕು ಮುರಿಯಲು ಬಂದಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ಧೈರ್ಯವಿದ್ದರೆ ಯುದ್ಧಕ್ಕೆ ಬಾ, ಇಲ್ಲದಿದ್ದರೆ ದೇವ ಸಿಂಹಾಸನವನ್ನು ನನಗೊಪ್ಪಿಸು.
ಎಲೆಲೆಲೆವೋ ತಾರಕ, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡು, ದದೀಚಿಯ ಬೆನ್ನು ಮೂಳೆಯಿಂದ ತಯಾರಿಸಿದ ವಜ್ರಾಯುಧ. ಇದರ ಮುಂದೆ ನಿನ್ನ ಅಜೇಯತ್ವದ ಆಟವೇನು ಸಾಗಲಾರದೋ ಮೂರ್ಖ. ಬಾ ಯುದ್ಧಕ್ಕೆ, ನಿನ್ನನ್ನು ಈ ಕ್ಷಣದಲ್ಲಿ ಯಮಪುರಿಗೆ ಅಟ್ಟುತ್ತೇನೆ. ಧಿತ್ತೈ ಧಿತ್ತೈ ಧಿಗದೈತೋ ಧಿತ್ತೈ ಧಿತ್ತೈ ಧಿಗದೈತೋ ಧಿತ್ತೈ ಧಿತ್ತೈ ಧಿಗದೈತೋ 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 ಧಿಗದೈತೋ. ಎಲ್ಲವೋ ತಾರಕ, ಇಡೀ ಈ ವಜ್ರಾಯುಧದ ಪ್ರಹಾರವನ್ನು
ಎಲ್ಲವೆಲ್ಲವೋ ದೇವೇಂದ್ರ, ಇದೋ ಈ ಗಧಾ ಪ್ರಹಾರವನ್ನು ಸಹಿಸು.
ಧಿತ್ತೈ ಧಿತ್ತೈ ಧಿಗದೈತೋ ಧಿತ್ತೈ ಧಿತ್ತೈ ಧಿಗದೈತೋ ಧಿತ್ತೈ ಧಿತ್ತೈ ಧಿಗದೈತೋ 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 ಧಿಗದೈತೋ.
ಬ್ರಹ್ಮದೇವರ ವರವನ್ನು ಪರೀಕ್ಷಿಸಿ ಆಯಿತು. ಇನ್ನು ಮುಂದೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಲೋಕಗಳನ್ನು ಗೆದ್ದು ನನ್ನ ವಶ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಳ್ಳುತ್ತೇನೆ.
ಧೀಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ತೋಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಧೀಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ತೋಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ದೀಂ ತದ ಝಣ ತೋಂ ತದ ಜಣ ತದಿತೈ ಝಣಂ ತದಿತೈ ಝಣಂ ತದಿತ ತೋಂ ತದಯ ತದಿತ ತೋಂ ತದಯ ತದಿತ ತೋಂ ತದಯ ತದಿತ ತೋಂ ತದಯ ತದಿತೈ ಝಣಂ ತದಿತೋಂ ಝಣಂ ತದಿತೈ ಝಣಂ ತಾಕತೈ ತಾಕತೈ ತಾಕಥ.
सोमनसश्च मे भद्रञ्च मे श्रेयश्च मे वश्यश्च मे यशश्च मे भगश्च मे द्रविणञ्च मे यन्ता च मे धर्ता च मे क्षेमश्च मे धृतिश्च मे विश्वञ्च मे महश्च मे संविच्च मे ज्ञात्रं च मे सूश्च मे प्रसूश्च मे क्षीरं च मे लयश्च महतं च मे मृतं च मे यक्षं च मे नामं च मे
ಗಿರಿರಾಜ ಸುತೆಯೋ ಹರನ ಪೂಜೆಗೆ ತಾನು ಸಿರಿ ಸಂಭ್ರಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೊರಟಳು ಬೇಗ. ಗಿರಿರಾಜ ಸುತೆಯೋ ಹರನ ಪೂಜೆಗೆ ತಾನು ಸಿರಿ ಸಂಭ್ರಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೊರಟಳು ಬೇಗ. ಮಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಕೇರಿಗೆ ಎಳೆನಾಗ ಸಂಪಿಗೆ ಅಂದದ ಮಂದಾರ ಹೂಗಳ ಕೊಯ್ದು. ಮಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಕೇರಿಗೆ ಎಳೆನಾಗ ಕುಳಿತಾಗ ಶಿವ ಧ್ಯಾನ, ನಿಂತಾಗ ಶಿವ ಧ್ಯಾನ, ನಡೆ ನೋಡಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಶಿವಗರ್ಪಿತ. ಕುಳಿತಾಗ ಶಿವ ಧ್ಯಾನ, ನಿಂತಾಗ ಶಿವ ಧ್ಯಾನ, ನಡೆ ನೋಡಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಶಿವಗರ್ಪಿತ. ಶಿವನನ್ನು ನೆನೆಯುತ್ತ, ಶಿವನನ್ನು ಹೊಗಳುತ್ತ, ಶಿವನಲ್ಲಿ ಮನವ ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸುತ್ತ, ಶಿವನಲ್ಲಿ ಮನವ ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸುತ್ತ. ರಾಗರಂಜಿತ ರತಿಪತಿ ತಾನು ಬೇಗನೆ ಬಂದು ಬಳಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂದು ಬಾಗುತ ಹರನಿಗೆ ಮನದಲ್ಲಿ ವಂದಿಸಿ ದೇವರ ಕಾರ್ಯ ಮಾಡಲು ಬಯಸಿ ಕಬ್ಬಿನ ಜಲ್ಲೆಯ ಬಿಲ್ಲನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿ ಬಿಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಹೂವಿನ ಬಾಣವ ಹೂಡಿ ಇಟ್ಟನು ಗುರಿಯ ಶಿವನೆಡೆಗೆ, ಬಿಟ್ಟನು ಬಾಣ ಹರನೆಡೆಗೆ, ಇಟ್ಟನು ಗುರಿಯ ಶಿವನೆಡೆಗೆ, ಬಿಟ್ಟನು ಬಾಣ ಹರನೆಡೆಗೆ. ಬಳುಕುತ ಬಳುಕುತ ಹೊರಟಿತು ಬಾಣ, ಮೆಲ್ಲಗೆ ಬಂದು ತಾಕಿತು ಶಿವನ. ತೆರೆದನು ಕಣ್ಣನ್ನು ಮುಕ್ಕಣ್ಣ, ಉರಿಯನ್ನು ಕಾರುತ ಕಿಡಿಗಣ್ಣ. ತೆರೆದನು ಕಣ್ಣನ್ನು ಮುಕ್ಕಣ್ಣ, ಉರಿಯನ್ನು ಕಾರುತ ಕಿಡಿಗಣ್ಣ. ತೆರೆದ ಕಣ್ಣಿನ ಉರಿಗೆ ಸಿಲುಕಿ ಉರಿದನು ರತಿಪತಿ ತಾನಾಗ. ಧರೆಗೆ ಶುಭವ ಮಾಡಲು ಬಂದ ಮಾರನು ಉರಿದ ಬಲು ಬೇಗ. ಒಡೆಯಿತು ಒಡೆಯಿತು ಗಿರಿಜೆಯ ಕನಸು, ನಡುಗಿತು ನಡುಗಿತು ಉಮೆಯ ಮನಸ್ಸು. ಒಡೆಯಿತು ಒಡೆಯಿತು ಗಿರಿಜೆಯ ಕನಸು, ನಡುಗಿತು ನಡುಗಿತು ಉಮೆಯ ಮನಸ್ಸು. ಒಡೆಯಿತು ಒಡೆಯಿತು ಗಿರಿಜೆಯ ಕನಸು, ನಡುಗಿತು ನಡುಗಿತು ಉಮೆಯ ಮನಸ್ಸು.
ಪಾರ್ವತಿ,
ದೇವಾ ದೇವಾ, ಈಗಲಾದರೂ ನಿನ್ನ ಮನಸ್ಸು ಕರಗಿತ್ತಲ್ಲ. ಈ ವಿಷಯವನ್ನು ನನ್ನ ತಂದೆಯವರೊಡನೆ ಪ್ರಸ್ತಾಪಿಸಿ ಮುಂದಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯವನ್ನು ಈಗಲೇ ನಿಶ್ಚಯಿಸಿ ಎಂದು ಬೇಡುತ್ತೇನೆ.
ಕಲ್ಯಾಣದ ಸಮಯ, ಗಿರಿಜೆಯ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣದ ಸಮಯ. ಕಲ್ಯಾಣದ ಸಮಯ, ಗಿರಿಜೆಯ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣದ ಸಮಯ. ಭರದಿ ನಡೆಯುವ ಕಾರ್ಯದ ಸಮಯ, ಕಲ್ಯಾಣದ ಸಮಯ, ಗಿರಿಜೆಯ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣದ ಸಮಯ.
ಜಗಮೆಚ್ಚುವ ಸಮಯ, ನಮ್ಮ ಜಗದೊಡತಿಯ ಸಮಯ.
ಜಗಮೆಚ್ಚುವ ಸಮಯ, ನಮ್ಮ ಜಗದೊಡತಿಯ ಸಮಯ. ಮಿಗಿಲಾದ ಸಂತಸ ಭಾವವು ಒತ್ತಿ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣದ ಸಮಯ, ಗಿರಿಜೆಯ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣದ ಸಮಯ. ಕಲ್ಯಾಣದ ಸಮಯ, ಗಿರಿಜೆಯ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣದ ಸಮಯ. ಕಲ್ಯಾಣದ ಸಮಯ, ಗಿರಿಜೆಯ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣದ ಸಮಯ. ಶಿವ ಪರ ಶಿವ ಸದಾ ಶಿವ ಈಶ್ವರ ಮಹೇಶ್ವರ ಪಂಚಾಶ್ರೇಯ ಪ್ರವರಾನ್ವಿತ ಪರ ಶಿವ ಗೋತ್ರೋದ್ಭವಸ್ಯ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿಸ್ಥಿತ್ಯುಪಸಂಹಾರ ಶಿರೋಭಾವಾನುಗ್ರಹ ಪಂಚಶಕ್ತ್ಯಾತ್ಮಕಸ್ಯ ಸದಾ ಶಿವಸ್ಯ ಪ್ರಪೌತ್ರಾಯ ಇಚ್ಛಾಶಕ್ತಿ ಜ್ಞಾನಶಕ್ತಿ ಕ್ರಿಯಾಶಕ್ತಿ ತ್ರಯಾರ್ಷೇಯ ಪ್ರವರಾನ್ವಿತ ಪರಾಶಕ್ತಿ ಗೋತ್ರೋದ್ಭವಸ್ಯ ಚತುರ್ಮುಖ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮಣಃ ಪ್ರಪೌತ್ರೀ. ಶಿವ ಪರ ಶಿವ ಸದಾ ಶಿವ ಈಶ್ವರ ಮಹೇಶ್ವರ ಪಂಚಾರ್ಷೇಯ ಪ್ರವರಾನ್ವಿತ ಪರ ಶಿವ ಗೋತ್ರೋದ್ಭವಸ್ಯ ನಾದಬಿಂದು ಕಲಾತೀತಾತ್ಮಕ ಸಚ್ಚಿದಾನಂದ ಸ್ವರೂಪಸ್ಯ ಪರಮಶಿವಸ್ಯ ಪೌತ್ರಾಯ ಇಚ್ಛಾಶಕ್ತಿ ಜ್ಞಾನಶಕ್ತಿ ಕ್ರಿಯಾಶಕ್ತಿ ತ್ರಯಾರ್ಷೇಯ ಪ್ರವರಾನ್ವಿತ ಪರಾಶಕ್ತಿ ಗೋತ್ರೋದ್ಭವಸ್ಯ ಮಹಾಮೇರೋಃ ಪೌತ್ರೀ. ಶಿವ ಪರ ಶಿವ ಸದಾ ಶಿವ ಈಶ್ವರ ಮಹೇಶ್ವರ ಪಂಚಾಶ್ರೇಯ ಪ್ರವರಾನ್ವಿತ ಪರ ಶಿವ ಗೋತ್ರೋದ್ಭವಸ್ಯ
ಚಂದ್ರಶೇಖರಾದಿ ಪಂಚವಿಂಶತಿ ಲೀಲಾ ವಿನೋದಾತ್ಮಕಸ್ಯ ಶ್ರೀಮಹೇಶ್ವರ ಪುತ್ರಾಯ ಇಚ್ಛಾಶಕ್ತಿ ಜ್ಞಾನಶಕ್ತಿ ಕ್ರಿಯಾಶಕ್ತಿ ತ್ರಯಾರ್ಷೇಯ ಪ್ರವರಾನ್ವಿತ ಪರಾಶಕ್ತಿ ಗೋತ್ರೋದ್ಭವಸ್ಯ ಗಿರಿರಾಜ ಶರ್ಮಣಃ ಪುತ್ರೀ ಶಿವ ಪರಶಿವ ಸದಾಶಿವ ಈಶ್ವರ ಮಹೇಶ್ವರ ಪಂಚಾಶ್ರೇಯ ಪ್ರವರಾನ್ವಿತ ಪರಶಿವ ಗೋತ್ರೋದ್ಭವಾಯ ಹರಿಣ ಪರಶುಧರಾಯ ಚತುರ್ದಶ ಭುವನಾಧೀಶ್ವರಾಯ ಶ್ರೀ ಪರಮೇಶ್ವರ ಶರ್ಮಣೇ ವರಾಯ ಇಚ್ಛಾಶಕ್ತಿ ಜ್ಞಾನಶಕ್ತಿ ಕ್ರಿಯಾಶಕ್ತಿ ತ್ರಯಾರ್ಷೇಯ ಪ್ರವರಾನ್ವಿತ ಪರಾಶಕ್ತಿ ಗೋತ್ರೋದ್ಭವಾಂ ಗಿರಿಜಾನಾಮ್ನೀಂ ಇಮಾಂ ಕನ್ಯಾಂ ಧರ್ಮ ಪ್ರಜಾ ಸಂಪತ್ಸಿದ್ಧ್ಯರ್ಥಂ ಭಾರ್ಯಾತ್ವಾಯ ವೃಣೀಧ್ವಂ ವೃಣೀಮಹೇ ಭಾರ್ಯಾತ್ವಾಯ ವೃಣೀಧ್ವಂ ವೃಣೀಮಹೇ ಭಾರ್ಯಾತ್ವಾಯ ವೃಣೀಧ್ವಂ ವೃಣೀಮಹೇ ಸುಮುಹೂರ್ತೋ ಸಾವಧಾನ ಸುಲಗ್ನ ಸಾವಧಾನ ಸುಮುಹೂರ್ತೋ ಸಾವಧಾನ ಸುಲಗ್ನ ಸಾವಧಾನ ಮಾಂಗಲ್ಯಂ ತಂತುನಾನೇನ ಜಗನ್ಮಂಗಲಹೇತುನಾ ಕಂಠೇ ಪದ್ಮಾಮಿ ಗಿರಿಜೆ ಸರ್ವೇಷಾಂ ಮಂಗಲಂ ಕುರು ಸುಮುಹೂರ್ತೋ ಸಾವಧಾನ ಸುಲಗ್ನ ಸಾವಧಾನ ಸುಮುಹೂರ್ತೋ ಸಾವಧಾನ ಸುಲಗ್ನ ಸಾವಧಾನ ಗಿರಿಜಾ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣ ಸುಮುಹೂರ್ತ ಸುಮುಹೂರ್ತೋಸ್ತು
ಕಲ್ಯಾಣವಾಯಿತು ಗಿರಿಜೆಗೆ ಮೃಡದೇವನ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣವಾಯಿತು ಗಿರಿಜೆಗೆ ಮಂಗಳ ಸಮಯದಿ ಬಂದನು ಬ್ರಹ್ಮ ಚಂದ್ರದ ನೋಟವ ಕಾಣಲು ತಾನು ಮಂಗಳ ಸಮಯದಿ ಬಂದನು ಬ್ರಹ್ಮ ಚಂದ್ರದ ನೋಟವ ಕಾಣಲು ತಾನು ಅಂದದ ಮುಖದ ಹರಿಗಾದಾಗ ಹರದಂಪತಿಗಳ ನೋಡಲು ತಾನು ಕಲ್ಯಾಣವಾಯಿತು ಗಿರಿಜೆಗೆ ಮೃಡದೇವನ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣವಾಯಿತು ಗಿರಿಜೆಗೆ ಮೃಡದೇವನ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣವಾಯಿತು ಗಿರಿಜೆಗೆ ಮೃಡದೇವನ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣವಾಯಿತು ಗಿರಿಜೆಗೆ
ಗಿರಿಜೆ ಪರಶಿವನ ಮಡದಿಯಾದಳು. ಮನ್ಮಥನ ಬಲಿದಾನ ಸಾರ್ಥಕವಾಯಿತು. ಇನ್ನು ಜಗದ ಬಯಕೆ ಕುಮಾರ ಸಂಭವ. ಶುಭ ಗಳಿಗೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕುಮಾರನ ಜನನವೂ ಆಯಿತು. ಜನ ಕೃತ್ತಿಕೆಯರು ಅವನಿಗೆ ಹಾಲುಣಿಸುವುದರಿಂದ 6 ಮುಖಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ತನ್ಯಪಾನ ಮಾಡಿ ಷಣ್ಮುಖನಾದ. ಪಾರ್ವತಿಯ ಬಯಕೆಯಂತೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಮುಖಗಳನ್ನು ಉಪಸಂಹಾರ ಮಾಡಿ ಒಂದೇ ಮುಖವನ್ನು ಹೊಂದಿ ಕುಮಾರನಾದ. ಹಾಲು ಕುಡಿದು ಬೆಳೆದ ಕಾರ್ತಿಕೇಯ ಕುಮಾರ ವಿಧಿ ನಿಯಮದಂತೆ ತಾರಕಾಸುರನ ಸಂಹಾರಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ಬೆಳೆದು ನಿಂತ. ಯುದ್ಧಕ್ಕೆ ಸಿದ್ಧನಾಗಿ ಬಂದ.
ಧೇಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಧೂಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಧೇಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಧೂಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಧೇಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ಧೂಂ ತತ್ತ ಜನ ತದಿತ್ತೈ ಜನ ತದಿತ್ತೈ ಜನ ತದಿತ್ತೈ ತತೋಂ ತದಯ ತದಿತ ತೋಂ ತತೋಂ ತದಯ ತದಿತ ತೋಂ ತತೋಂ ತದಯ ತದಿತ ತೋಂ ತತೋಂ ತದಯ ತದಿತ್ತೈ ಜನ ತದಿತೋ ಜನ ತಕತೈ ತಕತೈ ತಕಥ ಗುಡಿರೆಂದೆನು ತಾರಕ ಗುಡಿರೆಂದೆನು ತಾರಕ ಬಂದನು ಲೋಕ ಕಂಟಕ ಬಂದನು ಲೋಕ ಕಂಟಕ ಗುಡಿರೆಂದೆನು ತಾರಕ ಗುಡಿರೆಂದೆನು ತಾರಕ ಬಂದನು ಲೋಕ ಕಂಟಕ ಬಂದನು ಲೋಕ ದೇವನಿಂದಯ ಮಾಡುತ್ತವನು ಬಂದ ಸುರನು. ತಜ್ಜಂ ತದಿಗಿನ ಥೋಂ ತದಿಗಿನ ಚೈ ತದಿಗಿನ ಥಾ.
ಎಲ್ಲವೋ ತಾರಕ, ಬ್ರಹ್ಮನ ವರದಿಂದ ಕೊಬ್ಬಿದ ನೀನು, ನಿನ್ನ ಆಟ ಇನ್ನು ಮುಂದೆ ನಡೆಯುವುದಿಲ್ಲ. ನನ್ನ ಶೂಲಕ್ಕೆ ಮೊದಲ ಬಲಿ ನಿನ್ನ ತಲೆ. ಸಿದ್ಧನಾಗು ಯಮಪುರಿಗೆ ಹೊರಡುವುದಕ್ಕೆ.
ಹಾಲುಗಲ್ಲದ ಹಸುಳೆ, ನನ್ನ ಸಾವು ಅಷ್ಟು ಸುಲಭವಲ್ಲ ಕಣೋ ಹುಡುಗ. ಶಿವಬಾಲನಿಂದಲ್ಲದೆ ಮತ್ತಾರಿಂದಲೂ ಸಾವಿಲ್ಲವೆಂದು ಬ್ರಹ್ಮ ನನಗೆ ವರ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾನೆ. ಆ ಶಿವನಾದರೋ ತನ್ನ ಹೆಂಡತಿಯನ್ನು ಕಳೆದುಕೊಂಡು ವೈರಾಗ್ಯ ತಾಳಿ ಆ ಹಿಮಾಲಯದ ಮೂಲೆಯಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲೋ ತಪಸ್ಸಿಗೆ ಕುಳಿತಿದ್ದಾನೆ. ಹೀಗಿರುವಾಗ ನನ್ನ ಸಾವು ನಿನ್ನಿಂದ ಸಾಧ್ಯವೇನೋ ಪೋರ? ಹೋಗಿ ಗೆಳೆಯರೊಂದಿಗೆ ಆಟವಾಡು, ನಡೆ.
ಅಯ್ಯೋ ಅವಿವೇಕಿ ತಾರಕ, ನಿನ್ನ ಮೌಢ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಜಗತ್ತೇ ನಗುತ್ತಿದೆ. ಪಾರ್ವತಿ ಮತ್ತು ಪರಶಿವರ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣವಾದುದರ ಫಲವೇ ನನ್ನ ಜನನ. ನಾನೇ ಶಿವಬಾಲ, ಶಿವಕುಮಾರ. ಬ್ರಹ್ಮನ ಸಂಕಲ್ಪದಂತೆ ಕುಮಾರ ಸಂಭವವಾಗಿ ಕಾಲ ಈಗ ಕೂಡಿ ಬಂದಿದೆ ನಿನ್ನ ಮರಣಕ್ಕೆ. ಇಂದೇ ನಿನ್ನ ಬದುಕಿನ ಕೊನೆಯ ದಿನ. ನಿನ್ನ ಇಷ್ಟ ಬಂದ ದೇವರನ್ನು ಧ್ಯಾನಿಸಿ ಹಿಡಿ ಆಯುಧವನ್ನು.
ಆಶ್ಚರ್ಯ, ನನಗರಿವಿಲ್ಲದೆ ಶಿವಕುಮಾರನ ಜನನ. ದೇವತೆಗಳು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿಯೇ ಆಟವಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇರಲಿ. ಏ ಪೌರ, ಮೊದಲು ನಿನಗೆ ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಕಲಿಸಿ ನಂತರ ದೇವತೆಗಳನ್ನು ವಿಚಾರಿಸಿಕೊಳ್ಳುತ್ತೇನೆ. ಬಾ, ನಿಲ್ಲು ಯುದ್ಧಕ್ಕೆ.
ಲೋಕಕಂಟಕ ನಿವಾರಣೆ ಆಯಿತು.
नमः पार्वतीपतये हर हर महादेव।
ಬಂಧುಗಳೇ, ಇದುವರೆಗೆ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿನ ಪುತ್ಥಳಿ ಕಲಾರಂಗ ತಂಡದವರು ಸಮರ್ಪಣೆ ಮಾಡಿರುವಂತಹ ಕುಮಾರ ಸಂಭವ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ನೋಡಿದ್ದೀರಿ. ಈ ಕಾಲಕ್ಕೆ ತಕ್ಕಂತೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಬೇಕೋ ಅಷ್ಟನ್ನು ಮಾತ್ರ ಬಳಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿದೆ. ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಇಟ್ ಆಲ್ ಡಿಪೆಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಆನ್ ದಿ ಅವೈಲಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಆಫ್ ಟೈಮ್. ಈ ಒಂದು ಆವಾಗ ಹೇಳಿದಂತೆ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಭಾರವಾದ ಮರದ ಬೊಂಬೆಗಳಿಗೆ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಸೂತ್ರಗಳನ್ನು ಹಾಕಿ ನಾವು ಆಡಿಸ್ತೇವೆ. ಆದರೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಆಡಿಸೋದು ಹೇಗೆ ಅಂತ ನಿಮಗೆ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಬಂದಿರಬಹುದು. ಇದನ್ನು ನಮಗಾಗಿ ಆಡಿಸಿ ತೋರಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಹಾಗೆಯೇ ಇದಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ಹಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ರಮಾಮಣಿ ದತ್ತ. ನಮ್ಮ ಅಂತರಂಗದ ಮನೆಗೆ, ಮನಸ್ಸಿನ ಮನೆಗೆ, ಬುದ್ಧಿಯ ಮನೆಗೆ ಬಾಮ್ಮ ಎಂಬುದಾಗಿ ಪುರಂದರದಾಸರು ಮಧ್ಯಮಾವತಿ ರಾಗ ಆದಿತಾಳದಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಡಿ ತೋರಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದನ್ನು ನಮಗಾಗಿ ಹಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ರಮಾಮಣಿ ಮತ್ತು ಆನಂದಮೂರ್ತಿ. ಆಡಿಸಿ ತೋರಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ರಾಮಕೃಷ್ಣ.
ಭಾಗ್ಯದ ಲಕ್ಷ್ಮೀ ಬಾರಮ್ಮ ನಮ್ಮಮ್ಮನಿ ಸೌಭಾಗ್ಯದ ಲಕ್ಷ್ಮೀ ಬಾರಮ್ಮ. ಹೆಜ್ಜೆಯ ಮೇಲೊಂದೆಜ್ಜೆಯ ನಿಕ್ಕುತ ಗೆಜೆಯ ಕಾಲಿನ ನಾದವ ತೋರುತ. ಹೆಜ್ಜೆಯ ಮೇಲೊಂದೆಜ್ಜೆಯ ನಿಕ್ಕುತ ಗೆಜೆಯ ಕಾಲಿನ ನಾದವ ತೋರುತ. ಸಜ್ಜನ ಸಾಧು ಪೂಜೆಯ ವೇಳೆಗೆ ಮಜ್ಜಿಗೆಯೊಳಗಿನ ಬೆಣ್ಣೆಯಂತೆ ಭಾಗ್ಯದ ಲಕ್ಷ್ಮೀ ಬಾರಮ್ಮ ನಮ್ಮಮ್ಮನಿ ಸೌಭಾಗ್ಯದ ಲಕ್ಷ್ಮೀ ಬಾರಮ್ಮ. ಸಕ್ಕರೆ ತುಪ್ಪ ಕಾಲುವೆ ಹರಿಸಿ ಶುಕ್ರವಾರದ ಪೂಜೆಯ ವೇಳೆಗೆ. ಸಕ್ಕರೆ ತುಪ್ಪ ಕಾಲುವೆ ಹರಿಸಿ ಶುಕ್ರವಾರದ ಪೂಜೆಯ ವೇಳೆಗೆ. ಅಕ್ಕರೆಯುಳ್ಳ ಅಳಗಿರಿ ರಂಗನ ಚೊಕ್ಕ ಪುರಂದರ ವಿಠಲನ ರಾಣಿ ಭಾಗ್ಯದ ಲಕ್ಷ್ಮೀ ಬಾರಮ್ಮ ನಮ್ಮಮ್ಮನಿ ಸೌಭಾಗ್ಯದ ಲಕ್ಷ್ಮೀ ಬಾರಮ್ಮ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ರಾಮಕೃಷ್ಣ.
ಒಂದು ಮರದ ಬೊಂಬೆಗಳನ್ನು ಆಡಿಸೋದು ಹೇಗೆ ಅಂತ ನೋಡಿದ್ದೀರಿ. ಇದರ ಹಿಂದೆ ಇದು ಯಾಕೆ ಬೇಕಪ್ಪ ನಮಗೆ ಈ ಒಂದು ಕಲೆ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ಭಾರತೀಯ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಯ ಋಷಿ ಪರಂಪರೆಯ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳಿಗೂ ಉತ್ತರಗಳನ್ನು ನೀವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡಬಹುದು. ನಾಟ್ಯಶಾಸ್ತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ, ಶಿಲ್ಪಶಾಸ್ತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ, ಸಂಗೀತದಲ್ಲಿ ಬರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳಿಗೂ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳಿಗೂ ಉತ್ತರವನ್ನು ಈ ಬೊಂಬೆ ಆಟದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ನೋಡಬಹುದು. ಅದರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ನಾವು ಹೇಗೆ ನಾವು ಹೊರಗಿನ ಒಂದು ವ್ಯಾವಹಾರಿಕ ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡ್ತೀವೋ ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಅಲೌಕಿಕವಾದ ಒಂದು ಜೀವನ ಅನ್ನೋದಿದೆ. ಆ ಹೊರಗಿನ ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಗಿದೆಯೋ ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಅಲೌಕಿಕವಾದ ಜೀವನಕ್ಕೂ ಅನೇಕ ಉತ್ತರಗಳನ್ನು ಇದು ಕೊಡುತ್ತೆ. ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ನಾವು ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ಇವರು ಹಾಕ್ಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ 3 ಸೂತ್ರಗಳಿದೆ ನೋಡಿ. ಈ 3 ಸೂತ್ರಗಳು ನಮ್ಮ ಸತ್ವ ರಜಸ್ ತಮೋ ಗುಣಗಳನ್ನು ತೋರಿಸಿದರೆ ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮ ವಿಷ್ಣು ಮಹೇಶ್ವರರನ್ನ ಇದು ರೆಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಮೇಲೆ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಈ 3 ಸೂತ್ರಗಳು ಒಂದು ಸಿಂಬೆಗೆ ಒಳಪಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ಆ ಸಿಂಬೆಗೆ ವೃತ್ತಿ ಅಥವಾ ಬಿಂದು ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ನಾದ ಬಿಂದು ಕಲಾತೀತಾಯೈ ನಮೋ ನಮಃ ಅಂತ ಲಲಿತಾ ಸಹಸ್ರನಾಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ನೋಡಿ. ಅದು ನಾದ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಬಿ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೀರಿಯನ್ಸ್ಡ್. ದ ಎವಲ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ನಾದ ಈಸ್ ಬಿಂದು. ಅದೇ ಬಿಂದು ಇಲ್ಲಿದೆ. ಆ ಬಿಂದುವಿನಿಂದ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮ ವಿಷ್ಣು ಮಹೇಶ್ವರ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿಯಾದರು ಅಂತ ದೇವಿ ಭಾಗವತದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳುತ್ತೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಮನುಷ್ಯನಲ್ಲಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ತ್ರಿಗುಣಗಳನ್ನು ಇದು ಸೂಚನೆ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ ನೋಡಿ. ಇದು ಮುಂದೆ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಹಣೆ ಮೇಲ್ಭಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಗೂ ಕಿವಿಯ ಆ ಕಡೆ ಈ ಕಡೆ ಭಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಇದು ಕನೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಅದರಿಂದ ದ ಎಂಟೈರ್ ವೆಯ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ದಿಸ್ ಪಪೆಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ಆನ್ ಪಪೆಟಿಯರ್ಸ್ ಹೆಡ್. ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿದಾಗೆ ಈ ಬೊಂಬೆಗಳಿಗೆ, ಮಾನವಾಕೃತಿಯ ಬೊಂಬೆಗಳಿಗೆ ಕಾಲು ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಆಗ ಹೇಳ್ದಂಗೆ ಮುದ್ರಿಕಾ ಸಂಪ್ರದಾಯ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದೆ ನೋಡಿ. ಎಲ್ಲ ಒಂದು ಬೊಂಬೆಗಳ ಕೈ ಸಹ ಈ ರೀತಿಯಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಒಂದು ತೋರ್ಬೆರಳು ಹಾಗೆ ಹೆಬ್ಬೆರಳು ಎರಡೂ ಒಂದು ಸಂಗಮವಾದಾಗ ಉಂಟಾಗ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಮುದ್ರೆಗೆ ಚಿನ್ಮುದ್ರೆ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಆ ನಾಟ್ಯಶಾಸ್ತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಗೂ ಶಿಲ್ಪಶಾಸ್ತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಬೇಕಾದಂತಹ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸೌಲಭ್ಯಗಳಿದೆ. ಇದು ದೇವಸ್ಥಾನ ಆದರೆ ಇದು ಜೀವಸ್ಥಾನ. ಇದರ ಸಿಗ್ನಿಫಿಕೆನ್ಸ್ ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದರೆ, ನಾವು ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಪಟ್ಟರೆ ಇದೇ ಜನ್ಮದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಭಗವಂತನನ್ನು ಸಾಕ್ಷಾತ್ಕಾರ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಳ್ಳಬಹುದು, ನಮ್ಮಗಳಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಆತ್ಮವನ್ನು ನಾವು ನೋಡಿಕೊಳ್ಳಬಹುದು ಅಂತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಒಂದು ಸೂಚನೆಯನ್ನು ಈ ಮುದ್ರಿಕಾ ಸಂಪ್ರದಾಯ ಕೊಡುತ್ತೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ನೋಡಿ, ಇಲ್ಲಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಬೊಂಬೆಗಳು ಹಾಕಿಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಒಂದು ಜಡೆ, ಒಂದು ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ 24 ಸ್ಟೆಪ್ಸ್ ಇದೆ. ಕೆಲವು ಕಡೆ 27 ಸ್ಟೆಪ್ಸ್ ಇದೆ. 27 ಸ್ಟೆಪ್ಸು 27 ನಕ್ಷತ್ರಗಳನ್ನು ಸೂಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿದರೆ 24 ಹಂತಗಳು 24 ತತ್ವಗಳನ್ನು ಇದು ರೆಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ. ಪೃಥ್ವಿ ಅಪ್ ತೇಜೋ ವಾಯು ಆಕಾಶ ಶಬ್ದ ಸ್ಪರ್ಶ ರೂಪ ರಸಗಂಧ ಶ್ರೋತ್ರ ತ್ವಕ್ ಜಿಹ್ವಾ ಆಘ್ರಾಣ ವಾಕ್ ಪಾಣಿ ಪಾದ ಪಾಯೋಪಸ್ಥ ವಚನಾದಾನ ವಿಹರಣ ವಿಸರ್ಗ ಆನಂದ ಮನಸ್ಸು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಚಿತ್ತ ಅಹಂಕಾರ. ಇದಷ್ಟಾದಮೇಲೆ ಜ್ಞಾನಾತ್ಮ ಅಂತರಾತ್ಮ ಪರಮಾತ್ಮಾನಃ ಅಂತ ವೇದಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಅಷ್ಟು ಸ್ಟೆಪ್ಗಳನ್ನು, ಆ ತತ್ವಗಳನ್ನು, ಆ ಮೆಟ್ಟಲುಗಳನ್ನು ಸೂಚನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹದ್ದು ಈ ಒಂದು ಜಡೆ. ಮೇಲೆ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸೂರ್ಯ ಚಂದ್ರ ನೋಡಿ, ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಸೂರ್ಯನಾಡಿ ಚಂದ್ರನಾಡಿ ಯೋಗ ಅಭ್ಯಾಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರಲ್ಲ, ಅವರಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ಗೊತ್ತಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಹಾಕ್ಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಎಲ್ಲ ಆಭರಣಗಳಿಗೂ ಸಹ ಒಂದು ವೈಜ್ಞಾನಿಕವಾದ ಉತ್ತರ ಇದೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ಸೋದರಿಯರು ತಾಯಂದರು ಉಟ್ಕೊಳ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಸೀರೆನೇ ಇವಳು ಉಟ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾಳೆ. ಹಾಗೆ ಅದನ್ನೂ ಸಹ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಉಡಬೇಕು, ಎಷ್ಟು ನೆರಿಗೆ ಇರಬೇಕು, ಸೆರಿಗಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಗಿರಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದೊಂದು ವೈಜ್ಞಾನಿಕವಾದ ಅದಕ್ಕೊಂದು ವಿವರಣೆ ಇದೆ. ಇನ್ನೆಂದಾದರೂ ಒಮ್ಮೆ ಅವಕಾಶವಾದಾಗ ಅದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಾವು ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡೋಣ. ಇದು ಅಳಿದು ಹೋಗ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಕಲೆಗೆ ನಾವು ಆಕ್ಸಿಜನ್ನನ್ನು ಕೊಡಬೇಕಾಗಿದೆ. ಅದು ಹೇಗಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದರೆ, ನಮಗೆ ಅಲ್ಲಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆಗುತ್ತೋ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಮಗೆ ಪ್ರದರ್ಶನ ಅವಕಾಶಗಳನ್ನು ಕೊಟ್ಟರೆ ಅನೇಕ ಜನ ಕಲಾವಿದರು ಬದುಕ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಕಲೆಯೂ ಇದಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಅಪ್ಪ ಅಮ್ಮಂದರು ಮಾಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಆಸ್ತಿಗಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಹೊಡೆದಾಡ್ತೇವೆ. ಇದು ನಮ್ಮ ಋಷಿಗಳು ಕೊಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ, ಮುನಿಗಳು ಕೊಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ, ಭಾರತೀಯ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಕಲೆ. ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಇದೆ. ಆತ್ಮೋದ್ಧಾರಕ್ಕೆ ಏನು ಬೇಕೋ ಅದು ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಇದೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಹೋರಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೊಡೆದಾಡ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ನಾವು ಇವತ್ತು. ಯಾತಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಅಂದರೆ ಆಧುನಿಕವಾದ ಈ ದೂರದರ್ಶನ ಮೊದಲಾದವುಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಮಗೆ ಬೇಕಾದಂತಹ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಸೌಲಭ್ಯಗಳು ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಅಂದ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾರು ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ ವಿನಃ ಈ ಋಷಿ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಾಧಾನ್ಯತೆಯನ್ನು ಕೊಡಬೇಕಾಗಿದೆ. ಇವತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದನ್ನು ನೋವಿನಿಂದ ನಾನು ಹೇಳ್ತೇನೆ. ಇದೇ ರೀತಿ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಕೃಷ್ಣ ತುಲಾಭಾರ, ಪಾರಿಜಾತ, ಗಿರಿಜಾ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣದಿಂದ ನೋಡಿದಿರಿ, ಹನುಮದ್ ವಿಲಾಸ, ಲಂಕಾದಹನ ಮೊದಲಾದ ಪ್ರಸಂಗಗಳಿವೆ. ನಾವು ಕೇಳಿಕೊಳ್ಳೋದು ಇಷ್ಟೇ, ಇಂತಹ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಯನ್ನು ಪ್ರಚಾರ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾದ್ರಿಂದ ನನ್ನ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಚಪ್ಪಾಳಿಯಾಗಿ, ನನ್ನ ಜೊತೆ ಕಾಲಿನ ಹೆಜ್ಜೆಗೆ ಗೆಜ್ಜೆಯಾಗಿ ಇದನ್ನು ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಡೆಯೂ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಸಾರ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ನೀವುಗಳು ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಹರಿಸಿ ಕಳಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ನಾನು ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಹತ್ರ ಕೇಳ್ಕೊಳ್ತೇನೆ. ಇನ್ನು ಕೊನೆಯದಾಗಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಲಾವಿದರ ಪರಿಚಯ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಇಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಶುಭ ಸಮಾರಂಭದಲ್ಲೇ ನಮಗೆ ಈ ಒಂದು ಅವಕಾಶವನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿಕೊಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ನಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಿಯ ಹೊಸ ಮಿತ್ರರಾಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಅರ್ಷಿಷ್ಮಾನ್ ಹಾಗೂ ನಂದಿನಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಒಂದು ಕೃತಜ್ಞತೆಯನ್ನು ಚಪ್ಪಾಳಿಯ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ಕೊಡೋಣ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ನನಗೆ ಈ ವಿದ್ಯೆಯನ್ನು ಕಲಿತುಕೊಂಡು ಮಾಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಇದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ MR ರಂಗನಾಥ್ ರಾಯರು ಅವರಿಗೆ, ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಈ ಬೊಂಬೆ ಹಿಂದೆ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ವೇದಾಂತ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನಗಳನ್ನು ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ನನ್ನ ಗುರು ದಂಪತಿಗಳಾದ ಶ್ರೀರಂಗ ಮಹಾಗುರು ಹಾಗೂ ವಿಜಯಲಕ್ಷ್ಮಿ ತಾಯಿಯವರಿಗೆ ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ, ಬೊಂಬೆಗಳ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಒಂದು ಕೃತಜ್ಞತೆಯನ್ನು ಚಪ್ಪಾಳಿಯ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ಕೊಡೋಣ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಇದುವರೆಗೆ ಸಾವಧಾನ ಚಿತ್ತದಿಂದ ನೀವು ನಮಗೆ ಇದುವರೆಗೂ ಇದ್ದು ಸಹಕರಿಸಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ನಿಮಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನನ್ನ ಕಲಾವಿದರ ಪರವಾಗಿ, ಬೊಂಬೆಗಳ ಪರವಾಗಿ ನಮೋ ನಮಃ. ಕೊನೆಯದಾಗಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಪರಿಚಯ, ಅಲ್ಲಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ನಮ್ಮ ಯಜಮಾನರು ರಮಾಮಣಿ ಅಂತ, ಇದುವರೆಗೆ ನೀವು ಹಾಡಿದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಕೇಳಿದ್ದೀರಾ. ಆ ಕಡೆ ಆನಂದಮೂರ್ತಿಯಿಂದ ನೀವು ತಾರಕಾಸುರನ ಧ್ವನಿಯನ್ನು ಕೇಳಿದಿರಲ್ಲ, ಆ ಧ್ವನಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟವರು ಅವರೇನೆ. ಆ ಕಡೆ ಜ್ಯೋತ್ಸ್ನಾ ಅಂತ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ವಿದುಷಿ ಹಾಗೂ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲದನ್ನು ಸುಮಾರು 34 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ನಮ್ಮೊಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಹಿರಿಯ ಕಲಾವಿದೆ. ಅವರು ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ನಾನು ಅವಾಗ ಹೇಳಿದೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಗುರುಗಳು ರಂಗನಾಥ ರಾವ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ಅವರ ಹಿರಿಯ ಮಗ ವಿಜಯ್ ಅಂತ, ಅವರ ಮಗನೂ ಇಲ್ಲೇ ಇದ್ದಾನೆ, ರಾಘವ್ ಅಂತ. ಇವನ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿ ಈಗ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಸೇರಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾನೆ. ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಈಗ ಒಂದು 3-4 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ಸೇರಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾನೆ. ಅಕ್ಷತ್ ಅಂತ, ಅವನು ಇವಾಗ ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರ್ ಆಗಿ ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ಉದ್ಯೋಗದಲ್ಲಿದ್ದರೂ ಸಹ ನಮ್ಮೊಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಈ ಒಂದು ಕಲಾವಿದನಾಗಿ ಕಲೆಯ ಒಂದು ಆರಾಧಕನಾಗಿದ್ದಾನೆ. ಅದಾದಮೇಲೆ ರಾಮಕೃಷ್ಣ, ಆನಂದ ಮೂರ್ತಿಗಳ ಸಹೋದರ, ಸುಮಾರು 33-34 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ನಮ್ಮೊಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಹಿರಿಯ ಕಲಾವಿದ. ನಮ್ಮ ತಂಡದ ಗಣೇಶ, ಅವನ ನಿಜವಾದ ಹೆಸರು ಕೌಶಿಕ್ ಅಂತ, ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ ತಮಾಷೆಗೆ ಕೌಶಿಕ್ ಗಣೇಶ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಅವನು ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರು, ಈಗ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಕಲಾವಿದನಾಗಿದ್ದಾನೆ. ಇವನು ರಂಗನಾಥ್ ಅರಳಿಕಟ್ಟೆ ಅಂತ ನನ್ನ ಕೊನೆಯ ತಮ್ಮ. ಕೊನೆಯದಾಗಿ ಇಷ್ಟು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಪುಟ್ಟ ಕಲಾವಿದ ನಾನು, ದತ್ತಾತ್ರೇಯ ಅರಳಿಕಟ್ಟೆ. ಎಷ್ಟೋ ದಿನಗಳ ಕಾಲ ನಾವು ಸ್ಟೇಜ್ ಮೇಲೆ ರಿಹರ್ಸಲ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೂ ಸಹ ನಮಗೆ ಕೆಲವು ಸರಿ ತಪ್ಪತ್ತೆ. ಅಂಥದ್ರಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ನವರಸಗಳನ್ನು, ಹಾವಭಾವಗಳನ್ನು, ಅಭಿನಯವನ್ನು ಬೊಂಬೆಗಳ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ತರೋದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಪಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾದರೂ ತಪ್ಪುಗಳಾಗಿದ್ದರೆ ಆ ತಪ್ಪೆಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಮ ಕಲಾವಿದರದ್ದು, ಒಪ್ಪಾಗಿದ್ದರೆ ಭಗವಂತನ ಪ್ರಸಾದ ಎಂಬುದಾಗಿ ಸ್ವೀಕಾರ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ತಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಾರ್ಥನೆಯನ್ನು ಮಾಡ್ತೇನೆ. ಇನ್ನೇನಾದರೂ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಇದ್ದರೆ ಕೇಳಬಹುದು, ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಮಂಗಳ ಮಾಡೋಣ. ಯಾರಿಗಾದರೂ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಇದ್ದರೆ ಕೇಳಬಹುದು. ಇದು ರೆಕಾರ್ಡೆಡ್ಡು, ಬಟ್ ನಾವೇ ಎಲ್ಲ, ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಮುಂಚೆ ಲೈವ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ವಿ. ಇವಾಗ ನಮಗೂ ವಯಸ್ಸು ಇನ್ನೂ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ನೋಡಿ, ಇನ್ನು ಹುಡುಗರಾಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ ಆವಾಗಲಿಂದ. ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಅದನ್ನು ಪೂರ್ತಿ ರೆಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡಿಬಿಟ್ಟು ಕೊಡ್ತೇವೆ. ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ಲೈವ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾಳೆ ಅಂದರೆ 21 ಜನ ಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ, ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ ಮಾಡೋದು ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅನ್ನೋ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಯಿಂದ ರೆಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಸಾರಿ
ಅಲ್ಲ,
ಬ್ರೋಷರ್ ಕೊಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾರ್ಡು ಆಮೇಲೆ ಬ್ರೋಷರು ಇದೆ, ತಗೋಬೋದು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಗಿವ್ ಯು ಬ್ರೀಫ್ ಇಂಟ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ಅವರ್ ಪಪೆಟ್ ಥಿಯೇಟರ್. ಅದಾಗ ಬಂದು ನೋಡಬಹುದು.
No, I just want to thank you very much, Dattatreya. I think it is really fit in the memory of your Guru Ranganath Rao ji, and we remember him today, and we remember Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay. And the brochure is outside. Please, anybody who wants to see the brochure, please go ahead. And again, my deep gratitude. Thank you very much.
Mangalam Shri Nivasaya Ranganathaya Mangalam Mangalam Vijayambayai Jananyai Mama Mangalam Vijnana Mandiradhara Moolastambhaya Mangalam Ashtanga Yoga Vijnana Mandireshaya Mangalam.